This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. There's a lot going on in the world, you'll be aware. And you know I have this obsession with looking for unifying themes, things that sort of resonate regardless almost of which story we're talking about. And there is one, you get it a little bit with Joe Biden apologising or acknowledging that he shouldn't have talked about bullseye in the context of going after Donald Trump. And you register that and the failure of many headline writers to pick up on other elements of this interview that he gave to an American journalist in which he pointed out that Donald Trump told 28 provable lies in that last presidential debate, but inevitably focus is almost well, not inevitably, but focus is almost exclusively directed at Joe Biden's own slowness and fragility. It's not an either-or question, but it is a question of why there can't be both. And he made that point very forcefully. And it speaks... And also, you just heard his new running mate, J.D. Vance, who once compared him to Hitler. So I suppose at least we can all agree that's a valid comparison now, given that his own vice presidential running mate made it before falling in love with the rewards of becoming a Trump fan. But the comments he just made about Britain being the first Islamist country to get a nuclear bomb. I'm quite good at this job. I hope you'll allow me to say that. I know there's a phone in there somewhere, but I've got no idea what it is. That's just so off the charts. That's Liz Truss off the charts, that kind of comment. So where do you even begin to analyse it in terms of a phone in? But it speaks to something that I think is actually huge at the moment in our world, probably always is, but it goes through cycles of prominence. And it's if you are on the side of whatever you want to call it, equality, liberalism, decency, honesty, evidence-based reportage, then you can't go where the other guys go, even when it feels as if you're punching yourself in the face. You can't. I mean, Clinton tried, didn't she, to express it by saying when they go low, we go high. But Joe Biden can't not say, oh, maybe I shouldn't have used the word bullseye after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, even as Donald Trump continues that hope that we expressed very briefly yesterday that he was going to start calling for unity. Even as he goes on his very fascistic mission to render himself immune from any legal checks or balances. I know it's one of the great hallmarks, of course, of fascism, the denigration of democracy itself, fraudulent elections, which he is still pumping for, as indeed is his new running mate, both upholding the lies about the last election. And then of course, the denigration of judicial systems, a belief that the leader should somehow be above them, or at least that the machinery of law should be in the pocket of the authoritarian leader. So why am I mentioning all of that when we're about to start talking about a British MP? Answer: he is from the Reform UK party, the MP that we're going to be talking about. And I have a fairly well-documented disapproval of what Nigel Farage and whoever his current cronies are represent in the context of British democracy and British politics. So I need to be sure. It was Michelle Obama, I think, not Hillary Clinton, that said, when they go low, we go high. Thank you. It's like a hive mind now, my inbox. The only problem is if I make a big enough mistake, the inbox starts ticking over so quickly that I can't really read any individual messages, which is why today I won't be returning to the subject of square miles. It's important that I conduct this conversation in a way that is completely detached from any feelings or opinions about the party involved. It has to be a conversation that would be exactly the same if we were talking about a Labour politician, or if we were talking about a Green politician, or a Lib Dem politician, or a Conservative politician. And the reason why this is relevant to what Joe Biden has done in the context of the bullseye comments is that that if the boot was on the other foot, there would be double standards galore. This is to me at the very heart of the problem, if you like, that liberal democracies have when faced with authoritarian threats, is the authoritarian threats hinge upon double standards. I absolutely hinge upon double standards. One rule for us, another rule for everybody else, whether you're talking about actual court cases or whether you're talking about rhetoric. Your own man can say something absolutely hideous, but if Joe Biden says something about bullseyes, you come down on him like a ton of bricks. Even though there's obviously no way he could have known when he said it that there was an assassination attempt on the horizon. And I find it hard. I think of all the things that I find tricky as this sort of period of domestic political chaos begins to close, begins to diminish. I find it hardest, I think, to cling to the certainty, and it is a certainty, that it doesn't matter how violently your political opponents embrace double standards, you can't go there. Even when you're being accused of doing it, you have to have confidence in your own convictions to know that you're not doing it. So, a newly elected Reform UK MP was previously jailed for attacking his ex-girlfriend. How much does your reaction to that headline change, to that first line change, according to what party is inserted into the first line? Because if it changes, you're part of the problem. And yet, if you claim it doesn't change at all, you're probably fibbing. So for me, it's like, oh, here we go. Here's more evidence of how unfit to serve they all are. Okay? And that is a bias, an evidence-based bias, but it's still a bias. Because if it was a newly elected Conservative MP was previously jailed for attacking his ex-girlfriend, a newly elected Labour MP was previously jailed for attacking his ex-girlfriend, in the context of what we try to do together on the programme every day, your reaction has to be the same, even if it takes a bit of tweaking, even if it takes a bit of work. Your reaction has to be the same, doesn't it? Because the question I'm about to ask you is about several issues. It's about rehabilitation. It's about full disclosure. It's about honesty. It's about violence against women, male violence against women. It's about democracy. It's about accountability. It's about transparency. It's about honesty. It's about politics. And it's about crime. Do you know that was 10 different things there? I actually counted them on my fingers. 10 different things there contained in one phone-in topic. And the reason why I'm not coming out with a really strong opinion on this is because I won't do double standards. So I can't, in all honesty, put my hand on my heart and tell you that the opinion I have about this story is entirely untainted by the opinion I have about Reform UK in general and Nigel Farage in particular. I can't do it. So I can't come on air and fulminate about how awful it is that somebody who was jailed for assaulting his ex-girlfriend 20 years ago, nearly 20 years ago. The details are going to be important to the answers that you're about to provide. I can't, in all conscience, put my hand on my heart and say that my opinion about this story or my answer to the questions I'm about to ask you is completely objective. Well, maybe I can, but I can't be 100% certain of that. So, a 38-year-old MP, newly elected, was jailed nearly 20 years ago for attacking his ex-girlfriend. It's in the South Basildon and East Thurrock constituency. The party has admitted that it knew this before adopting him as a prospective parliamentary candidate, but none of the details were disclosed to the electorate or indeed anybody else before the ballot was taken. It was the Mail Online, I think, who broke the story at the weekend, or it may have been the Sunday Times. These things are important. I should have established that. He describes himself as a former banker, although Byline Times have looked into some elements of his professional background, and he's described it himself as a teenage indiscretion. A generous person, he told the paper, might call it a teenage indiscretion, for which, as I say, he was jailed. So what do you think? I believe in rehabilitation. I believe in the ability of people to change, to become better. I think it's hard. I think yesterday the hopes that Donald Trump was going to emerge from his assassination attempt with his, as one person who'd had a near-death experience told us, he honestly believed that Trump would somehow be changed by it, and perhaps he will be, but not as things stand for the better. He returned immediately to the sort of desperate attempts to evade the consequences of his own allegedly illegal acts, or not even allegedly, of course, in the case of one of them. But what do you think? Should a convicted, I mean, it's not a wife beater, is it, if it's an ex-girlfriend, but should a convicted assaulter of women be permitted to sit in the House of Commons? Or does your answer to that question hinge upon whether or not it was disclosed to the electorate before? I think, just for the record, I think mine does. I think there should be. There isn't. We're having a conversation about morality more than legality today. The requirement should be that you disclose such a conviction to your potential employer, which is essentially your electorate, not your party leader. But 20 years is a long time. He was 19 at the time. There is some dispute over what happened, but no dispute over the jail sentence that was handed down. He was convicted at Chelmsford Crown Court nearly 20 years ago. I think there are people listening to this right now who have 20-year-old convictions that prevent them from doing certain jobs. I choose my words carefully on things like this, but if I found out that one of my daughters was seeing a man who had been jailed for assaulting a previous girlfriend 20 years previously, it would very much change my attitude towards their relationship. And I think if he hadn't disclosed it, it would put the entire relationship in a slightly different space. And I think it is a question that needs to be asked and indeed answered. But I want you to do it, if you can, and I've tried, in a way that reflects our rejection of the kind of double standards that Nigel Farage himself deploys to an almost unbelievable scale. There's a man who talked about picking up a gun if the Brexit vote wasn't properly enacted, who's spoken of violence being the inevitable next step if the referendum didn't go his way, and yet who has the audacity to claim that evidence-based descriptions of Donald Trump's behaviour somehow contributed to the decision of a 20-year-old Republican, registered Republican, to attempt an assassination at the weekend. So that's what double standards look like. And the temptation to engage in them can sometimes be huge. But you can't, because the minute you do that, you become part of the problem that your job is to solve and address. So should a convicted criminal imprisoned for assaulting women be allowed to take a seat in the House of Commons without his electorate knowing about his criminal past when they cast their votes? Okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. A newly elected MP has taken a seat in the House of Commons without anybody who voted for him knowing that he was once jailed for attacking a former girlfriend. What do we think about that? 10:17 is the time. And the number you need is 0345 6060 973. You might be a convicted criminal. You might be somebody with experience of this kind of assault from the other side, if you like, of the fence. Or you might be a political... what's the word I want? A political hygienist, somebody who's desperate to see a cleaner politics. Or you might be in a position to tell me intelligently and openly why this is absolutely fine, why there's absolutely no problem at all with having an MP sitting in the House of Commons who was imprisoned for attacking a former girlfriend and who didn't tell anybody that when he was running for a seat in Parliament. It's 10:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 10 is the time. V says, it's the part where you say the electorate didn't know that makes it a big problem for me. He should have disclosed that and then let the people decide how much it matters. And Alan says, had he described it as his greatest regret and mistake, then I would be inclined to believe he was a reformed character. However, as he attempts to pass it off as a minor faux pas from his youth, speaks volumes. Well, he's done both, to be fair, Alan. He has described it as the greatest regret of his life and suggested that a generous person might see it as a teenage indiscretion. And Seema makes an excellent point. This is a tough one, James. I've just listened to your full disclosure with Timpson. That's the new prisons minister who is a firm believer in rehabilitation. So I listen, for the avoidance of doubt, if we reach 11 o'clock persuaded that this is all absolutely fine, then that is absolutely fine by me. My job, oddly, is that it's least effective when I don't have strong opinions. If you could do a scientific experiment on what makes the phones ring with really good contributors, then the strength of my own opinions can sometimes be the best catalyst. But I can't do it today. I can't do it today, even if you want me to, because right now I do not know whether I would have exactly the same attitude to this if it wasn't an MP from a party I hold in such low regard. I mean, even using the word party is questionable, of course, given that it's a limited company in which the majority shareholder is the self-appointed leader. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. So what do you think? And why, crucially? Braden's in Croydon. Braden, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Just wanted to say I'm a big fan. I just read your new book. Brilliant bit of
What
work.
a perfect start to the show. I hope there's not a big but coming, Braden. Carry on.
No buts. So I just wanted to say, I think, obviously, it should have been disclosed that this man was convicted of a crime, physically assaulting a woman. But I think that we, as the electorate in a democracy, should be able to vote for him, like if you feel that he's the right man. But I mean, for the reform voters that obviously made him an MP, I don't think it would have had much difference, even if they had found out.
You see, if I had a little alarm that goes off when we inadvertently stray into the areas of bias or double standards, it would have gone off then, because you wouldn't say that about voters for another party, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
And you might be right. And you're a caller. You're allowed to generalise in that way. But I today am trying not to. And it's interesting how quickly we fall into the space where we're going, but because it's this party, my opinion is this. And it can't be. It has to be the same opinion regardless of what party it is.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like for any party, it obviously should be disclosed about the candidate, but it should always be up to us whether we feel he's fit.
So we're not going to say, because there are jobs you wouldn't be able to do with that kind of conviction on your CV, I think. But if it's there and if you disclose it, then that's absolutely fine to run for Parliament. You could run as a champion of rehabilitation. You could run as a there but for the grace of God go I candidate, explaining how you turned your life around and why you want therefore to help other people embark upon similar journeys. But he doesn't disclose it, and he hasn't disclosed it. So we move into the theoretical realm, if you like, of whether or not he should be sitting in the House of Commons. What's your answer to that question?
Maybe I've had a realisation that he probably shouldn't.
I am going to allow myself an opinion in the course of the hour. I think at the moment, if it had been disclosed and he won the election, that's fine. But it wasn't disclosed and he won the election. Therefore, it's not fine at all. Braden, thank you. 24 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A lot of international comparisons being made, but I don't know enough, if you like, about the current South African sports minister and similar, but I probably should be a little bit more up on it. Louise isn't happy. I'm absolutely astonished at you, James. It's a 100% given that he must not be in Parliament. He assaulted a woman. Why are you saying that if he was, for instance, a Labour MP, you may feel different? Get your wife to instigate the WASIC alarm. No, it's not quite what I'm saying. I'm simply saying that my opinion might be coloured by his politics, and I don't want it to be. I want to know what we feel about a convicted and imprisoned assaulter of women being allowed to sit in the House of Commons despite none of the people who voted for him knowing about his criminal past. 0345 6060 973. Rich is in Maidstone. Rich, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
I was having an... Thank you. No, I was having an interesting discussion with your producers. So before I checked out this fact, which I'm going to give you, my gut feeling on the matter was basically if we started looking at this, not just at this individual, but MPs with criminal records, my gut feeling said that we'd have a lot of MPs with criminal records.
But we're not talking about COVID penalties or being caught not wearing a seatbelt, are we? Or are we?
Of course.
No.
Of course. Well, this is exactly it, because that judgment may be based on obviously what party this person is part of, and that's where that bias may come from.
I want to be careful.
But this fact... Well, exactly. This fact now. So
go on, just give us the fact, man. Give us the fact.
Standards Commission.
Yes.
I'm sorry. So in 2012, there's been no update since then, but in 2012, 43% of serving MPs at the time had criminal convictions.
How many had been imprisoned for beating up an ex-girlfriend?
Unfortunately, this is where someone did actually ask it as a freedom of information request. However, due to personal data, they couldn't give individual breakdowns of exactly what has occurred. But now think about that. 43, that's almost half of our parliament.
Yes, but that could include the last two prime ministers would be on that list.
Exactly.
Because they got their COVID.
So this is...
penalty. So I don't understand the point that you're making. This isn't about a criminal record for, stealing a pint of milk when you were 12. This is about a criminal record for being imprisoned after beating up, after attacking a former girlfriend. I don't understand the point you think you're making.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is that you can't have one rule for one dependent on the crime the severity of the crime. You have to... Well... You can't base...
Okay, so what's the percentage...
Otherwise, you're going to have grey areas.
No, hang on, stop talking over me when I'm trying to talk over you. What's the percentage of MPs who've been imprisoned then? Let's just look at imprisonment then, and then we can keep it nice and objective.
Right.
By the way, anyone doubting this statistic, it is true. The 43% is true, but how many have been imprisoned?
Yes. That is something I'm still trying to look for you guys, and I'll text it in and I'll WhatsApp it to your thing. But the point I was just trying to make with it, James, I remember back in the day, I can't remember exactly who the person was, but we did have an MP as well, a serving MP who did have a criminal conviction and was sent to prison because they had run over someone and it was manslaughter and they had killed the individual. However, that was in their past. And then they still then serve. So then you have to ask your question, if we're allowing someone who killed someone by accident in a road accident, allowing that person to serve as an MP who didn't disclose it as well at the time or anything like that.
I don't remember that story. I remember a serving MP getting into trouble for doing something similar, but my memory's a bit... hazy. What is your answer? You keep asking all these questions. What is your answer to the question? Hang on, let me phrase it in a really clear and concise fashion for the first time in my life. Do you feel that an MP who was imprisoned for attacking a former girlfriend and got elected without telling voters of his past should currently be sitting in the House of Commons?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay. There we go. And the reason is because there are a large number of MPs who have criminal records. I don't know technically whether or not that COVID fine counts as an actual criminal record, so scratch that from the record. But there will be plenty who have done relatively low-level crimes. If they'd been jailed, I'm confident that my colleagues on Fleet Street would have found out and we would know about it. But for reasons you've expressed very well, with statistical support, this is okay. And with the unfortunately as well, because we'd probably prefer to live in a world where this hadn't happened. But we don't. It is coming up to 10:30. Phone lines are wide open. If you don't text me complaining that you can't get through, just grab the line that Rich has just vacated by dialing 0345 6060 973. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:32 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the question is tricky, isn't it? A lot of you struggling really with elements of it. So I need to just remind you that we are in the realms of theoretical. There is currently nothing to stop an MP from being elected without telling his electorate or her electorate that they have a criminal conviction and a former imprisonment, in fact, for attacking a former girlfriend. The question is, should we? Should the law be different? And the point, I think, about Reform, UK Limited, is this wouldn't have happened with another party. We saw the problems that they had with vetting. We know the history of candidates drawn to Nigel Farage's projects to have questionable pasts. I think there was the one up the road in Basildon who had to step down because he was a former member of the BNP. So this wouldn't have happened to a different party, or even perhaps, to be very generous, perhaps it wouldn't have happened if the election hadn't taken everybody by surprise and they'd had time to properly vet their candidates list. I don't think they would have put up a man who'd been imprisoned for attacking his former girlfriend. But that's what tests conventions. That's what tests rules and regulations. They did. And he unexpectedly won by just 98 votes. There's recounts and everything. And of course, Farage being Farage, they have to pretend that they're absolutely cool with it. Even to claim some form of victimhood, probably, knowing them. But that's not the point. The point is it has happened. And I want to know how we, and in this instance, you, feel about it. 10:34 is the time. And the reason why I disagree with the last caller, just a bit, is because to me it is a very specific sort of crime. Male violence against women feels different from male violence against males. Whether it should or not, I don't know. I personally believe that it should, but it just does. So, all of the MPs who've got convictions for not paying their TV licence or been caught not wearing a seatbelt or whatever it may be, it's not going to be, to me at least, the same, but it was to him. Charlotte's in Islington. Charlotte, what would you like to say?
Hi,
Hello.
lovely to speak to you.
Likewise.
So I'm a survivor of domestic violence,
Okay.
and I was in a very similar situation. I was attacked in public. I had my 8-month-old baby with me. Members of the public had to pull him off me. And even though there was witness statements and there was evidence to me, my perpetrator still was not prosecuted. The CPS felt that there was not enough evidence to prosecute him. The weight of evidence against this guy to have a prison conviction for domestic violence means that it was so serious that he is a violent man. And I think you don't understand, unless you're in that situation, the terror that you feel. So even his ex-girlfriend will be seeing him in the Houses of Parliament thinking that he won, right? Mm. The level of violence is so extreme.
We don't know that we don't know the full details of what happened in this particular case, but I think I can agree with you that the threshold for prosecution is generally quite high, as you discovered from the failure of the authorities to prosecute your assailant.
And unfortunately, in my case, there was enough weight of evidence that social services were involved because I had my child, so I'm continuously having to prove that it wasn't my fault. And it feels like it's just, let them do whatever they want. It's absolutely fine. And don't forget, you've got other MPs that have been accused of rape in the House of Commons. So all you're doing is confirming that women... But
they are, I think, suspended until the investigation is complete. This is it's a problem of a different order. And just to support what you say, that the mother of his victim told Mail Online he is a monster. He left marks on her body. It took 2 security guards to pull him off her. So, his denials of the details notwithstanding, that is certainly her memory of the event, and your experience of similar events is that you don't have any guarantee of a prosecution being pursued, let alone a jail sentence being handed down. So it sounds like a particularly nasty crime. It
is, and it stays with you forever.
I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm not remotely surprised, but I'm still very sorry to hear that.
Oh, I appreciate that, but again, it's just we're reaffirming that it's fine, that it's okay, that it's his opinion, that it's what he says should be believed, and I find that really difficult to deal with.
I'm almost uncomfortable leading you into the kind of more obvious phone-in territory, Charlotte, but the law as it stands allows him to run without disclosing, And in the event of him winning, he could have sat in the House of Commons. If the Mail Online hadn't had a bit of a dig, he could have sat in the House of Commons without anybody ever knowing. What would you like to change out of that chain of events? Because would you go as far as to say if you were convicted of this kind of crime 20 years ago, you shouldn't be allowed to stand for office?
I think it's super important to realise that we've got a new Labour government, and Jess Phillips has had a really good appointment, and she is such an advocate for this.
Yes.
I think it's within Labour's reach to make a change to the law, because it's a time for change, and all we're having is, it feels like there's a removal of the old boys club to a certain extent, which, reform are totally part of. I feel that this really needs to be looked into, because the House of Commons is a reflection of our society. So if we're going to allow it, then that's a reflection of how we're going to treat women. So I really think it needs to be changed.
As far as saying if you have this kind of conviction you can't stand, or you can't stand without disclosing. And the results might be the same, because I'm pretty sure that there would have been at least 50 people in this constituency put off voting for him if they'd known, and then the result of the election would have been different. But what are you specifically? Are you saying he shouldn't be allowed to stand ever, or he should be compelled to disclose his convictions?
So I think he should not be allowed to stand ever.
Some crimes are, however rehabilitated you may be or may claim to be, some crimes have a point of no return in terms of political office, because, as you said, it's a reflection of society itself.
It really, really is. And I just hope, I hope there's change. I really hope there's change. And reform scare me so much that I'm not surprised that this is a reform candidate.
Again, I mean, like with you, given your background and the story that you've told, I'm not going to come down on you like a ton of bricks, but the conversation needs to be conducted in a way that you would feel exactly the same if this was a Conservative MP or a Labour MP. I just want to stress that point, because I may share some of your misgivings, but in the context of what we want the rules to be, they have to be rules that we want to apply to all of them, to every MP, to every putative politician. 1040 is the time. One element of it, that's a brilliant call, Charlotte, and an awful lot of love and support for you coming in. One of the elements of this that is quite interesting is quite a few of you across that Reform UK say that they knew in advance about the previous conviction and jail sentence. I didn't know which way that would go, whether it made you feel he'd been more honest because they knew, or whether you would look askance at them because they knew and didn't think that should prevent him from standing, or indeed that they would be compelled to disclose it. 10:40 is the time. A slight change of direction now. We head towards Cardiff, where LBC's Wales correspondent Bronwen Weatherby has a little bit more detail on the story that broke shortly before we came on air this morning, of 4 ministers resigning from the Welsh Government, calling for the First Minister Vaughan Gething to quit. A little bit of background, if you would, Bronwen, and then perhaps some thoughts on what may lay ahead either later today or later this week for the First Minister.
Yes, James. Well, we started seeing these statements just before 10 a.m, one after the other. At the moment, as you said, 4 ministers have resigned, but it may be that more are to follow. Right now, those include Mick Antoniv, Julie James, Leslie Griffiths and Jeremy Miles. Jeremy Miles, if you remember, being the man who ran against Vaughan Gething to be First Minister in that Welsh leadership race only a few short months ago now. All have called on Mr Gething to resign, calling his position untenable, and this comes after quite a tense meeting held last week between Welsh Labour members, where we're aware that Mr Gething's position was discussed for several hours. Now, in their statements, Mick Antoniv, his now former Counsel General, points out that after losing a vote of no confidence in the Senedd, Mr Gething no longer commands a majority and therefore would be unable to pass a budget. Julie James, his housing minister, pointed, of course, to the serious issues over his campaign donations. To remind listeners, Mr Gething has faced backlash after he took £200,000 from a man whose company was convicted for environmental crimes. This raised questions over his judgment, and Leslie Griffiths, who was his cabinet minister for culture, said events over several months had now fractured the party, with Mr Miles adding that all this infighting has become a distraction and that someone else is now needed to reunify the party. Now, one of the biggest issues not mentioned specifically in these letters, but has been very damaging to Mr Gething's tenure, is the sacking of Minister Hannah Blythen over claims she leaked pandemic-era WhatsApp messages to the press. She's always maintained that she was not the leak, and the First Minister was facing a debate tomorrow calling on him to release the evidence against her. Now, the Welsh Conservatives believe this is a signal that Mr Gething's time as First Minister is coming to an end, and it may be that in the coming hours or days we do see Mr Gething step down, although he has held steadfast until now. And this comes, of course, just weeks after the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, endorsed him several times on the general election campaign, saying that he backs him, that he thinks he's the best person to be First Minister in Wales. But so far, the Welsh Government, James, and Mr Gething have been silent on this.
What do your tea leaves tell you, Bronwen? I mean, he's not going to be able to stay silent, is he?
No, I don't believe he is. He's facing a very, very difficult moment right now. He wasn't the most popular within his own party, even during the leadership contest. In fact, Jeremy Miles got more votes among Welsh Labour ministers than he did. So the question will be whether he can actually recruit anyone to replace those who've left. And if many more go, he certainly won't be able to, and that will definitely make his position untenable, and he may have to step down.
Bronwen Weatherby, many thanks indeed. I would not be surprised if there is movement on that story in the course of today, and if there is, we will of course bring it straight to your attention. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Doug points out that if MPs required a criminal record check level 1, similar to airport workers, then this problem would never have arisen. The system to avoid it already exists. And Ian writes, crikey, James, this is a hard one. On the one hand, we need to give people the opportunity to reform their behaviour and move on from past mistakes. But on the other hand, we need to keep MPs and those in charge to a higher standard. I genuinely have splinters in my bum from being on the fence on this one, says Ian. I think Charlotte has pushed me off the fence. Some people didn't need any help at all on that, pointing out that we reported on 3 women being killed in horrific circumstances as a consequence of domestic violence only last week, which is what I was trying to articulate when I said it's a particular type of crime. And here's an interesting thing. In case I wasn't clear enough what I meant about double standards and why I will strive to talk about this case in the same way I would talk about it if it was an MP from a different party. And I was trying to articulate that can be quite dispiriting sometimes, because you know that if the boot was on the other foot, it wouldn't. So I have the technology, as you know, I can see by clicking on a message that comes into the studio all the previous messages that have been sent in by that person. And I'm not going to read out any that are defending him or claiming he should have been allowed to stand if I can establish from a cursory glance at the record that you are a fan of Nigel Farage or a fan of Reform UK, because I don't believe you would adopt exactly the same approach to a Labour politician or a Conservative politician or a Green politician. And I have the means to check. So maybe just bear that in mind, that you are inadvertently proving my original point about double standards, and whether you realise it or not, just how much you love them normally, and how silly sometimes people like me feel when we insist on not deploying similar approaches and try, in the words of Michelle Obama, when you go low, try to go high. So I don't think my opinion would be different if it was a politician from a different party, particularly after hearing from Charlotte. And therefore, the question becomes, should an MP who failed to tell voters that he had been jailed for attacking a former girlfriend, an attack that, according to the victim's mother, needed 2 bouncers to drag him off, and which a court found to be severe enough to merit a prison sentence. Goodness knows what the statistics are on allegations of assault that do not reach court, let alone result in a prison sentence. Should he be sitting today in the House of Commons? Yes or no? And then, of course, because that's how this programme works, why? It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:49 is the time. As a couple of people have pointed out, there's something, talking a little more, of course, about double standards. The statement from Reform UK was that Reform UK believes strongly that people can change their lives. That was in defending the decision to allow a man who'd been jailed for attacking a former girlfriend to stand and win, indeed, as a candidate at the general election. But Peter has reminded me that the platform upon which they campaigned pledged to deport foreign nationals immediately after their prison sentence ends and withdraw citizenship from immigrants who commit crime, with the exception of some misdemeanor offences. I know you're not supposed to think too deeply about these allegations. Are they allegations? These pledges? These platforms? But what happens to someone who hasn't got dual citizenship if you withdraw their citizenship? And if you can do it to someone who wasn't born here, why can't you do it to someone who was born here? You'd be withdrawing citizenship from Boris Johnson if he committed a crime. I suspect some of you could probably live with that, but it just goes to show what happens when you try to turn xenophobia into actual workable policy. But as you're pointing out, it rather gives the lie to the idea that Reform UK believes strongly that people can change their lives, or maybe only white British men who've been jailed for attacking a former girlfriend can change their lives. 10:50 is the time. Martin is in Swindon. Martin, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I'm really conflicted on this. Anyway, morning, James.
Hello,
sorry,
mate.
first time caller, long time
Welcome.
listener.
Welcome
all that.
aboard. All that malarkey.
Yeah, I when this story first came out, I was the guy because he was a reform character anyway.
Yeah.
It was a case of no, he shouldn't be where he is at the moment.
Yeah.
Because of what had happened. But then I had to do a bit of soul searching. Back in 1983, I was convicted of actual bodily harm. It was against a club doorman.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, had that, did my 180 hours community service, and life went on. Then in 2004, I got a job as a medical gas engineer.
Right.
I'd gone back into education and got my HND in engineering. I managed to get this job, and I had a DBS check. And nothing showed up on this DBS check.
Because the conviction was spent?
No.
Oh.
No. It wasn't an enhanced DBS check.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
Then I 3 years later had another DBS check, never showed up. So then I left that job and I went to work in a hospital. 3 months later, I was called into the office and we'd had your DBS back, and this had shown up on there. Why didn't you disclose that this had happened? And I presumed it would have been spent by then.
Yeah.
You know? But the difficulty I've got is I believe that the system worked and I became a reformed character, and I think I'm a good member of society now. I mean, I work in hospitals, special care baby units, you know, and during COVID I was working in ICU and all kinds of places like that. But if the way I was thinking that he shouldn't have that job because of that, I wouldn't have my job, would I, because of that?
You could. Just to clarify one thing, I think the moral dimension of the conversation we're having is whether the conviction is spent or not is irrelevant to the moral dimension that we're having. And there are a couple of things that occur to me in the context of your experience. The first is that you weren't jailed, so that introduces a new threshold, I think, for potential voters. And the second is the violence against women.
Oh, no, it wasn't against women.
I know it wasn't. I know. Well, I suppose it could have been, couldn't it? But
no, it wouldn't have been.
You would have behaved different. Well, that's the point. I think rightly, violence against women lands differently before the law and on our consciences than violence against men.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be the same.
But the idea of convictions or whatever is to rehabilitate people.
Yes, exactly.
And then people go on, and majority of people who've had that short, sharp shock or whatever go on to become good members of society. Yeah. Now I was conflicted on it because straight away when I heard it was a reform character, I wanted him hung up by his bootlaces.
Sure.
You know,
and metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, just definitely. Or in the stocks throwing rotten tomatoes at him. But it's.
This is why we're doing it. This is why I said right at the outset that this isn't going to be binary. It's not going to be black and white. I don't think either of us, even if we did decide that rehabilitation is the trump card here, I don't think either of us could make that case convincingly to his victim. Or her mum.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And that is the bit that, with me, it is with me that, no, he shouldn't have that job because it was against a woman. I'm not saying a weaker member of society, but it was a man against a woman, and it doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen.
And disclosure allows the voters to decide how much it matters. And then if they decide to return him to Parliament, that's it's not absolutely fine, and we'd still struggle to justify it to the victim. But the
thing is, with going for that job, you're automatically putting yourself on a higher pedestal.
What?
And you should disclose this kind of stuff.
I think I agree with that. I think the nature of the job is key as well.
Yeah.
What happened in that meeting? We didn't actually finish the story. Did you lose that?
When I went for my meeting, I kept the job.
Okay.
I ended up having my probation extended.
Okay.
And it was I was basically told in known terms, if I stepped out of line, then it was like a final written warning because I hadn't disclosed it.
Yes, and that was the point. You hadn't disclosed it. If you had,
I hadn't disclosed it.
That was the game changer.
Yeah, because on previous DBS checks it hadn't shown up, but this was an enhanced because I would be working in the children's ward, special care baby units, and all sorts of stuff like that.
Well, the system worked, but better late than never, I suppose.
Yes.
What a call.
Yes,
Thank you. I'll tell you what, you got the hang of it for a debutant, didn't you? You settled straight in. Thank you, Martin. I'm getting a few messages like this. To echo your previous female caller, James, I think it was Charlotte, was it? The fact that he served a custodial sentence speaks volumes to the level and severity of the violence. It's appalling that he's allowed to stand for office. He should never be allowed to, regardless of how long ago the conviction was. Male violence against women is such a huge problem in our country. And what chance do we have of tackling it if we allow those convicted of it to stand? Surely it looks like we are condoning it. And this is a really good message from Emma. Discussion of varying reactions to crimes based on things like political persuasion always puzzle me. And I think it might be an autism thing. I can do nuance, but this really isn't a nuanced situation. If you're found guilty and jailed for assaulting, not even a random victim, but someone they're supposed to have loved and respected, therefore with an inherent power dynamic, then it may be black and white thinking, but sometimes that's just another way of saying unyielding principle. No domestic abusers in government or no domestic abusers in Parliament seems pretty simple to me, no matter which rosette. And they add, violence against partners is by definition abusive. I don't want an abusive mindset given power over others. It rarely ends well. Well, there's a little bit of room for manoeuvre inside there because the abusive mindset is not necessarily, and I'm a great believer not just in rehabilitation but also in therapy, the abusive mindset is not necessarily a permanent state, is it? In which case the punishment is permanent even if the mindset isn't. And how big a punishment is it really to be told you're not allowed to be an MP? Ruth's in Ilford with the last word on this. What do you think, Ruth?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So, having worked for a former MP and in a constituency office, seeing constituents on a daily basis, I'm looking at it from a slightly different perspective that if he was the MP and we deal with constituents on a daily basis that are victims of violent crime, domestic violence.
Gosh, yes.
You know, we've had a lady that was murdered locally. You know, it's really, really horrific. Now, would the families, would those victims feel comfortable coming to him if he was the MP? I don't think so. So what we have to, the elected representatives standing there to represent their constituents. I don't think any female constituent that was a victim of domestic violence would have the confidence or feel comfortable to approach him given his past. I mean, I believe in rehabilitation. And in terms of really the judgment on how rehabilitated I think he may be, his comment that he made to the media after, he was very defensive. It didn't sound very, it didn't sound like he was
he described
reformed.
his regret at almost at what had happened to him.
Yes.
As opposed to his regret of what he'd actually done, because his description of what he'd actually done contained the phrase that generous people might see it as a teenage indiscretion.
Yeah, I mean, he was really defensive and just downplayed the severity of it. So it was a non-apology. It was not an apology.
He said, the biggest regret of my life, and I wish I could go back in time and fix things.
Yeah,
but you see what you know.
Just because he got caught and it's come out.
We don't know that. But I think your central point about walking into an MP's surgery with domestic violence issues that you're hoping to receive help with, and finding yourself talking to someone who's been sent to jail for attacking a former girlfriend is almost the last word on the subject, Ruth.
Yeah.
Just thinking about it, should that situation be allowed to arise? And that, of course, drives the coach and horses through the full disclosure notion that if he'd told voters that he had this on his CV, on his record rather, and they had returned him regardless, then we'd almost be telling that young woman to suck it up. Sorry, you'll have to find someone else to help you if you don't want to go to the guy who was jailed for attacking a former girlfriend. 11 o'clock is the time. Complete change now, because we move from a very specific and subjective story that we tried and succeeded, I think we can agree, to make it objective, into an entirely theoretical. Doctors have been told to recognise eco-distress, and I want you to tell me what it is.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Very briefly, for people who enjoy my sometimes flailing attempts to keep an even keel, and you're when I say you're cross with me, it's not an unpleasant anger. It's just a mild irritation. People think I tried too hard to be balanced in the last hour, and that actually, if it hadn't been a Reform UK MP who was jailed for assaulting a former girlfriend, I would have gone in much harder, because I wouldn't have felt any need to try not to be biased. And do you know what? You might have a point as well. I'm going to pause the eco-distress conversation and respond to the breaking news that you just heard there towards the end of Amelia's bulletin. The news that Gareth Southgate, Gareth Southgate, the most successful England manager since Sir Alf Ramsey, has decided to step down. I've got his. I've got the statement from the FA that I will share bits of with you. I haven't at the moment got a statement from Gareth Southgate except the news that he has made that decision. He's stepped down as England manager, and I think it is one of those moments where we have a football phone in. Well, I can't remember. When's the last time we had a football phone? Have we ever had a football phone in before? We've had footballers phone in, sometimes very felicitously, in the case of Graham Lasso and others, sometimes somewhat less felicitously, in the case of Frank Lampard many years ago. But I don't. Yeah, we have done a football phone in. So I don't think this is a radio station where we start speculating on who the next manager will or should be. Although certainly you'd hope Jurgen Klopp might reconsider his time off or sabbatical or whatever you would call it. But I think we do look back and wonder what Gareth Southgate's legacy will be. How will he be remembered? And also, given the emotion that we've been through over the last couple of weeks, how do you feel about his decision to step down? I'm gutted. I felt that and do you know what? I need to confide in you quickly. I really like football. But I support Kidderminster Harriers, and the more I've got into Kidderminster Harriers since my dad died, oddly, it was one of the last things we did together was go to a game, and there's been a sort of weird recalibration of my footballing mind, my footballing heart, and I can safely say that one of my happiest memories of all time was the day that Kidderminster Harriers got promoted from the National League North to the National League, only to come down immediately the following season. But that was, for me, I was with my sister, and it was transcendent. So I do get it. I do understand football, and yet I'm conscious. The reason I'm mentioning this, I'm conscious in the back of my mind of almost apologising to you for having a football phone, and I need to get rid of that. I'm supremely qualified to conduct this conversation, and you are supremely qualified to contribute to it, even though we don't generally spend 3 hours a day talking together about football. I've got the full statement from Gareth Southgate, and then I'll give you my reaction, and then you can give me yours. As a proud Englishman, it has been the honour of my life to play for England and to manage England. If I start getting emotional, I'm going to be very cross with myself. It has meant everything to me, and I have given it my all. But it's time for change. and for a new chapter. Sunday's final in Berlin against Spain was my final game as England manager. I joined the FA in 2011, determined to improve English football. In that time, including 8 years as England men's manager, I have been supported by some brilliant people who have my heartfelt thanks. I could not have had anyone better alongside me than Steve Holland. He is one of the most talented coaches of his generation and has been immense. I have had the privilege of leading a large group of players in 102 games. Every one of them has been proud to wear the 3 lions on their shirts, and they have been a credit to their country in so many ways. The squad we took to Germany is full of exciting young talent, and they can win the trophy we all dream of. I'm so proud of them, and I hope we get behind the players and the team at St George's Park and the FA, who strive every day to improve English football and understand the power football has to drive positive change. My special thanks go to the backroom staff who have provided the players and me with unstinting support over the last 8 years. Their hard work and commitment inspired me every day, and I am so grateful to them, the brilliant team behind the team. We have the best fans in the world, and their support has meant the world to me. I'm an England fan, and I always will be. I look forward to watching and celebrating as the players go on to create more special memories and to connect and inspire the nation as we know they can. Thank you, England, for everything. P.S. I'm looking forward to joining Phil Brown at Agborough to restore Kidderminster Harriers to their natural place in that last bit's a joke. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? 9 minutes after 11 is the time. Let me see if I've got one yet. Have I got one yet? Yep, here's one. Did James bother with a phone-in when Chris Coleman stepped down from managing Wales? Had Wales just been defeated in the Euros final when that happened, Karen? Because if they had... Is that really your name? If they had, then I would have done. Or maybe not a whole phone-in, but we certainly would have paid it a lot of attention. You know we would. It's the scale of Southgate's achievements that make his decision to step down newsworthy. It's not simply the fact that we didn't do a phone-in when Sam Allardyce stepped down. I want you to tell me what he did, what he achieved both on and off the pitch. I want you to tell me a little bit football-y about what his legacy will be, about the scale of his achievements. It's a weird one. I think there were 55 teams in the Euros, not including Wales, Karen. I think there were 55 teams in the Euros, and we came second. And most of us in life would take that, wouldn't we? Second out of 55 people. And yet there's not much in sport for second place. I've always admired people who win silver medals and bronze medals, but I've also understood that the mentality of people who routinely win gold medals probably involves a little bit of disdain for silver and bronze medals. But I'm not a gold medal player. I would be happy to be the second or third best in the business. I'm no Terry Wogan. I'd be more than happy to be mentioned in the same breath, but I don't have that. I want to be, and also this isn't really a measurable medium. But Gareth Southgate made me proud again. He changed the way that I watch international football. Something really strange happened in maybe not the first game, but certainly even when Spain went ahead on Sunday night, I didn't have that bleak certainty that it was all over. I thought it is more than likely that we're going to get an equaliser and then our pop Cole Palmer. That didn't used to really happen with England games. It happened a bit under Terry Venables. But it didn't used to happen, really, in England games. In England games, you expect, certainly penalties. The penalties this tournament were, that wasn't an England team of old. That was like a German team of old. And we're now better than they are. So what's going on? Well, in your mind right now, 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Yeah, you have to qualify for the Euros, lads, don't you? So maybe 55 is I've done it again with the square miles. Have I misremembered that number? But it's not just the ones that made it to Germany for the tournament, you fools, who are responsible. 12 minutes after 11 is the time. Gareth Southgate steps down as England manager. Your reactions to that, please. Mine is pretty straightforward. I wish he hadn't. I felt that the new generation coming through, some of the people he didn't take with him this time, most obviously Grealish and Rashford, based, of course, upon their performance last season, but it spoke to a new generation coming through, best embodied probably by not just Bellingham, but also Palmer. and Saka on the right. The idea that this team now, you build a team around Cole Palmer and Jude Bellingham. Harry Kane probably played his last game for England. That could win a World Cup in 2 years' time. But without Gareth Southgate there, without the longevity, the consistency, I don't know how possible that is. And yet, of course, a lot of you already pointing out he didn't win anything. So what are we all getting so sad about? 13 minutes after 11 is the time. So you're listening to LBC and we're having a football phone-in, which is probably going to be a once-in-a-decade occurrence unless we do actually win the World Cup in 2 years' time, which I think now becomes less likely as a consequence of Gareth Southgate's decision to step down. The number you need is 0345 6060 973 is the way onto the show. I'm just getting so many messages now. I'm trying to keep up with them. Here's a nice one. I'm not much of a football fan, but for me, Southgate did something I've never seen in my lifetime. He got the men's England team to 2 finals. That's a hell of an achievement. I think you're right. I really do. And Kobe Mainoo as well. That team that goes into the next World Cup could be the best England team we've seen in years. And that is partly down to him, and it makes his decision not to lead them into the next big tournament a little bit harder to swallow. I'm not going to take a call until after the break, so and then we'll get stuck in from here right through to 12 o'clock. Off goes Gareth Southgate. What does he take with him from you? What would you like to put into his pocket as he heads off to whatever challenge he chooses next?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:16. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll do eco-distress in the next hour. This is news that the Royal College of Physicians wants doctors to use their status as trusted members of the community to raise the topic of climate change and to recognise people suffering from what is called eco-distress, anxiety and depression caused by climate change. The Daily Mail inevitably chooses to stick it on its front page as something that they want its readers to get cross about. So not only helping people who are distressed, but also seeking to raise awareness of the existential threat our species faces from climate change. Yeah, down with that sort of thing. Down with that sort of thing. But we are having a completely different sort of conversation just for this hour, just until 12 o'clock today. And we are marking the decision of Gareth Southgate to step down as England manager. My friend Scott's put it really rather beautifully, actually, although I don't necessarily agree with the very first bit. He goes, it's definitely time for Southgate to go, but I will be forever grateful to him for transforming the England team from a group of players I generally disliked to a group of players I profoundly loved. Crikey. Colin's in Swanley. Colin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Morning.
Hello.
Excuse my throat, my voice. It's a bit hoarse. I was at Berlin.
Oh, you made it out
on
there.
Sunday night. Yeah, it was fantastic. You know, the crowd, the English fans were brilliant. We outnumbered the Spanish 2-1 easily, if not more.
That's the spirit.
But you know, the truth of it is, I just think he does need to go. You know, I love Southgate. I'll absolutely defend him all the way.
Yes.
But he just lacks that tiny little bit of knowledge that you need to get over the line.
Is this the tiny bit of knowledge that all fans have, but that Gareth Southgate doesn't?
So. Yeah, absolutely. I've got it. He should have phoned me up.
Because you won't be able to articulate. We can all say he should have taken Kane off sooner. He should have started with Palmer. You know, we've all got that. But I want you to try to articulate that sixth gear almost that you feel Southgate lacked, if you can.
Well, I was at Wembley 3 years ago when we played Italy.
Yeah.
So, you know, I follow England quite a bit. I don't go to every away games, but I do, you know, I do.
You do all right, mate, don't you? Eh?
Yeah. Well, I'm retired now, so I'm happy days.
Yes.
But anyway, Italy was a good example. We went 1-0 up. We scored an early goal with Shaw, and that was the time where you had to go for it, get the second, and he just didn't do it. And
you put that on him.
I do, yeah, absolutely, I do. But I still supported Southgate. I still absolutely wanted him to carry on, do the job, But I do think the time has come. Everyone, all the pundits, hundreds I've spoken to.
You might regret this. What if I've got some breaking news as well? The First Minister of Wales has just resigned. Colin, you weren't with him last weekend as well, were you? By any chance? You don't know Vaughan Gething? What do you do? I'm going to upset everybody now. Wales are going to come for me. Everybody, what are you talking about? Gareth Southgate, our First Minister, has just resigned. Colin articulates something that an awful lot of people, I think, feel, even if they perhaps couldn't put it into words as well as he does, which is he should have won something. But is that actually fair? I don't know. I now have a statement from the First Minister of Wales, Vaughan Gething. He has taken he writes, I have this morning taken the difficult decision to begin the process of stepping down as leader of the Welsh Labour Party and, as a result, First Minister. Having been elected as leader of my party in March, I had hoped that over the summer a period of reflection, rebuilding and renewal could take place under my leadership. I recognise now that this is not possible. If this had happened on any other day, I don't know that I would read out the entire statement. I probably would, but the fact that I've just read out Gareth Southgate's entire statement means that I have to read this one out, otherwise I'll get even more abuse in my inbox than I'm getting already. It has been the honour of my life to do this job even for a few short months, to see the dedication to public service from our civil service and the dedication to civility from the Welsh public, to see the election of a new government in Westminster and the fresh hope that brings to Wales. I've always pursued my political career to serve Wales, and being able to show underrepresented communities that there is a place for them, for us, is an honour and privilege that will never diminish. It's what drew me into public service. Before becoming an MS, I fought employment cases for people who'd been mistreated at work. I wanted to give power to those without a voice. That has always been my motivation. I also campaigned to help create the Senate, clocking up 30 years of work to support Wales's devolution journey. This has been the most difficult time for me and my family. A growing assertion that some kind of wrongdoing has taken place has been pernicious, politically motivated, and patently untrue. In 11 years as a minister, I have never ever made a decision for personal gain. I have never ever misused or abused my ministerial responsibilities. My integrity matters. I have not compromised it. I regret that the burden of proof is no longer an important commodity in the language of our politics. I do hope that can change. I will now discuss a timetable for the election of a new leader of my party. Finally, I want to say thank you to those just joining us. I'm reading out a resignation statement by Vaughan Gething, the First Minister of Wales. I'm not leaving LBC. Finally, I want to say thank you to those who have reached out to support me, my team and my family in recent weeks. It has meant the world to all of us. To those in Wales who look like me, many of whom I know feel personally bruised and worried by this moment, I know that our country can be better. I know that cannot happen without us. There will and there must be a government that looks like the country it serves. Thank you. Vaughan Gething there, certainly not going quietly, a palpable anger with some of the assertions and accusations made against him, and a powerful reference towards the end to his ethnicity, which leads us back, of course, to Gareth Southgate's England team, and one of the defining moments being the extraordinary racist abuse of 3 players when they missed penalties. And Gareth Southgate's response to that was epic, actually. And you could see the bond that he has with all of his players, but particularly perhaps in the context of the most recent tournament with Bukayo Saka, when he stepped up to take his penalty with aplomb. 23 minutes after 11, we're having a radio football phone-in. Colin, thank you. I'm going to crack on because so many people are keen to join in. It's quite possibly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, this. We've got the... So, off the top of your head, can you put these 3 politicians in order? Humza Yousaf, Vaughan Gething and Liz Truss, in order of how long they stayed in their job. Truss is coming last, right? She was the shortest? Humza Yousaf and Vaughan Gething? It's a weird sort of chapter, isn't it, in politics? And quite a few of you, you've all got a very similar sense of humour, actually. Quite a lot of you saying, we're going to get Biden for the hat-trick. I think that's less likely, oddly, as a consequence of the assassination attempt. But there we are. 24 minutes after 11. Gareth Southgate has stepped down as England manager. How do you respond to that news? 0345 6060 973. Nick's in Woodford. Nick, what do you reckon?
Hi, James.
Hello.
This is Turn Up for the Brook. I've always got you in the background, but thought, oh, he pricked my ears when I heard about,
you said to yourself, he's finally talking about something I'm interested in.
I know, exactly. No. Listen, it means I don't have to go to TalkSport later anyway.
Good.
But Gareth Southgate, I think he's done a lot for the English game. Positive culture, camaraderie. He took them from the under-21, so I think he understands the kids. And I think he understands a modern footballer better than like your, I don't know, Mourinho or someone like that, because who falls out with a lot of, they expect the old ways. So I think he's done all of that and more. And I think for the, he's handled the media really well as well. We used to have Graham Taylor with turnips on the front pages. So he's done very well. However, I think tactically, I just think he falls down a little bit. I think everyone talks about how he got us to the semis and the finals, and that's great. But even from back in 2018, when he first got us to the semis, there was a lot of positive talk about him. But myself, all I saw was the fact that they lost 3 games in that tournament to a decent team. And this is my point. Every time we come up against a very good team, we can't get over the line. And that's where it falls down. And yes, we got to the semis and quarters and finals, but we've always had an easy run. He's been very lucky with his runs. And
again, a sense that there's a gear missing. Oh, I think we've lost Nick, which means I can't ask him whether or not he's a tennis fan, because while he was talking, I found myself comparing Tim Henman to Andy Murray. I hope that's not unfair. I don't know that we're going to get a Djokovic or a Federer anytime soon, but Southgate is a Henman and we need a Murray. Sue's in Leeds. Sue, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Yes. First time got through to you.
What's it? Yeah, caller.
First time caller, that's the word.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. And I thought first woman perhaps on to talk about this as well.
Yes.
But, I think what Gareth brought was the way he conducted himself. I'm sure a lot of people have already said this. And he, to me, he really sort of supported and shielded his players when the backs were up against the wall.
That was very special, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And the Black Lives Matter protest, when he allowed, his players kept taking the knee in spite of all the crap he was getting for allowing that to happen.
Just don't go any ruder than that word you just used, please.
Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Sorry.
So it's a football phone. It's a football phone-in.
Yeah, it's in the morning now, isn't it? I do beg your pardon.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right.
But yes, and I think that also I kept supported the team from the start of this tournament when everyone was saying, "Oh, they're rubbish," because look at the Italian team; they were rubbish. I mean, they really went out with a whimper. So I think comparing those teams, you have to look at all of the other teams. I know we're always, on about our own teams, but I think, I think that what Gareth, again...
So are you glad or sad that he's gone? Or both?
Both. I'm sad, but I think it's taken a lot out of him, actually.
Interesting.
And I think it's time possibly to pass a baton on. But what I'd like is for him to be involved in the next selection, because up until Gareth, probably since, say, Alf Ramsey, the selectors, FA, have been rubbish at selecting a sort of,
Venables was all right, but
being a bit hard.
But he came, and Bobby Robson was all right, but he came in after that weird Capello Allardyce period where they did seem to be making mistakes on the scale with never letting Brian Clough have a go at the job. Although you being in Leeds, you probably don't think as fondly about Brian Clough as I do, Sue. It's coming up to 11:29. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Can you try a bit harder? I think Sue gave us a bit of a heads up there. Can you try a bit harder to sound like a typical contributor to a football phone-in? Because I think everything's a little bit too polite and cerebral at the moment. Omar's in Ealing. Omar, what would you like to say?
Yeah, mate, I don't agree with what you're saying, and I hope I'm not cerebral on this.
That's better. No, nice one. Let's go in hard.
Mate,
Studs up.
Can I go?
Yes.
Mate, as usual, you've got an opinion, right? But I don't agree with it. So you're saying Gareth Southgate should have stayed. He's brilliant. He's the best thing that could have happened, and we would have progressed under him. Couldn't disagree more, mate. Yeah, he's all right. He's done well. We've reached 2 finals. Brilliant. The issue has been, throughout history, England have been an underperforming team. The team that we have, the players that we have, should always do better. So just because in the past we've been really bad, and this time we've been better, doesn't mean we've progressed. We still underachieve. You need that little bit of knowledge that guy was talking about. I don't have it. No, the fans don't have it, but they know it's missing. Who has it is the top managers, mate. They have it, and they know what difference it is to win that tournament, and that's what we've never had.
So you want a kind of a Klopp, a Mourinho in his heyday. I'm trying to think of an English manager who might a Brian Clough
equivalent. Yeah, an international equivalent. I'm not sure those guys could do it at that level, but at the international stage.
Well, that's part of the problem, though, isn't it? Because the pool from which you pick an international manager is different from the pool. Eriksson and Capello were world-class managers, and neither of them particularly covered themselves in glory.
But this is where the FA comes in, right?
Yeah.
So the FA, as an institution, needs to understand our game, right? It needs to understand our structure. It needs to understand the kind of players that are coming through.
But Southgate understood all of that better than anyone. This is the problem I think you've got, is that you're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. There is no perfect here. Pep Guardiola's not going to suddenly turn up at Lancaster Gate. So who? Then give me an example of someone who'd do better.
I don't know. This is the FA.
You have to. It's a football phone-in. You've got to have a strong opinion. Who should get the job next and be better than Gareth Southgate?
I don't know.
Make that noise again. Make that noise again.
I don't know, Klopp.
Klopp, you can't have... Well, yeah, that would be nice. But would he happy? Ancelotti, I don't know. Thank you, Omar. So you got there in the end, but I didn't feel you were rude enough at the outset. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34. This is nice from a pal of mine, Keith. Southgate articulated what it is to be a leader, a professional, and proud of his country's team. I'm not a football supporter, but I am a Southgate supporter. I think his reaction and leadership to that racism at the last Euros showed people how to lead and made me lift my head with pride rather than cynicism. And you know, talking of pride rather than cynicism, how many people telling me that Gareth Southgate was never going to win anything and that you knew that all along would have said that shortly after Cole Palmer equalised on Sunday night? Because that is, for me, a mark of how much he's changed the culture surrounding the England team, the expectations of the England fans. Spain were the best side in the tournament, but we still thought we might do them on the day. And when Cole Palmer equalised, you thought the sky was the limit. So you didn't sit there when Cole Palmer equalised on Sunday night thinking, we're never going to win anything with Southgate. You thought we were about to win the Euros. So I don't know. Maybe that's unfair of me to point that out, but I don't know that it is. 11:35 is the time. Sharon is in Waltham Forest. Sharon, what would you like to say?
Yeah, my heart sank, just saying that when I heard that he was leaving, because I actually still think that there's more to be done. I actually still think we could do really well with the team and the players in the World Cup, which is coming up in 2 years, and there's all the qualifiers to go through. The only caveat that I put that's a little bit of, as I said, like a blot on his copybook, which I think could have been a bit more of a sort of stronger manager, leader, whatever, is to make a really hard decision. The decision that everyone was calling for, and that was to have dropped Harry Kane. And we're talking about Cole Palmer so much. He literally had an impact on every single game he came on. Indeed. And there's a point at which you go, well, actually, then he's clearly getting through and changing the shape of the team in a way that everyone was saying very early on that Harry wasn't able to. And I'm
scored 44
fan, so
goals.
I feel really bad about saying that.
Well, then it makes it even more sincere, doesn't it? It makes it even more authentic. Yeah. But he scored 44 goals. And I know you're not suggesting that it would be a like-for-like swap. It's just about where Palmer would fit into the side and perhaps Kane would not.
But James, it's happened before.
Yes, it has.
This is the thing. It's what's happened, because I'm, as a Spurs fan, I know this. In the Champions League final, what he played, he should not have played because he was still coming back from an injury. The same is true of the 44 goals he played with, like in Germany recently. He ended that season injured. He should, and so therefore he was never completely 100% fit. But also, you just got to look. Do you think he's going to play any part in the World Cup?
No, I don't think he is, and I think you're probably right on this. And that might be part of Southgate's thinking, is that he's realised that he's a bit sentimental, or that he's running out of, starting again, as it were, with a team that's not built around Harry Kane is a mountain that's a little bit too high. If Kane was 4 years younger, maybe Southgate would give it another 2 years in the job. But the every tournament, to defend him from every tournament, certainly I think the last 3 tournaments, he's come out of the blocks very slowly, Kane, and everybody's thought, he's got to find the guts to drop him. He's got to, and then by game 2 or halfway through game 3, he wins the game. He turns it around, but it never happened this time. It never happened. It never looked like it was going to, did it?
I think it's just because of time as well. Not to be ageist, but it's just the young ones are just moving around that pitch a bit better. But don't get me wrong, I love Gareth Southgate, and I'm really sad to see him go. And I kind of wish he would continue.
But it's time.
Yeah. All right, take care.
I think it is. No, you as well. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean it's time for you to go. I mean it's time for him to go. Paul's in Harrow. Paul, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James.
Hello.
I was disappointed with the news, but the biggest disappointment for me was that the FA have allowed Southgate to just cut off and go, whoever's decision it was, because I think what Gareth Southgate brought over the years he's been with the team, and also as a player, I think someone else should have been nurtured and been shadowed Southgate for a couple of years.
I don't see how you could do that, though, because no one would want to be the bridesmaid. If you're of a sufficient calibre to be in the frame to manage an international squad, you're not going to be happy spending 2 years as a bridesmaid, are you? With a guarantee. And then that means we'd know that this was his last game, and you'd have that. I'm drawing some odd analogies today, but it would be like David Cameron revealing that he wasn't going to run at the next election.
Yeah, but I know, James, but I think what Southgate has brought is that camaraderie between him and his players and that respect. And I think you have to cut that off now and start again with Jurgen Klopp.
It's not going to be Jurgen Klopp. Can we nip that in the bud immediately, please? It's definitely not going to be Jurgen Klopp.
No, I know. I've heard his name being
only here, only by lazy sort of speculation. But I mean, absolutely no chance. Do you want to have a go at a really tortured analogy? Because there's some good ones coming in. Danny says Harry Kane has done plenty of good in the past. So has Joe Biden. And he adds, not for England, admittedly, but it's time for both of them to step down and make room for somebody else. I like that. Have you got one? Have you got a tortured analogy that you can spring on us, Paul?
Well, yeah. Let me give you this. This is something that came out of it for me. When with this loyalty to Kane, Stones, and also Walker.
Yes.
Walker had an opportunity. He plays in Man City. He looks good. Foden plays in Man City. He looks good. Put them in an England team, and they have to do a little bit more work. There was a time where Walker, for once, steamed down the right-hand side and crossed the ball. James, it went on the other side for a throw-in.
Yeah, he smashed it too hard.
Yeah, Cucurella, I'm not a massive fan.
Every time Cucurella got the ball, I found myself singing like Cucaracha. I was going, Cucurella. Anyway, sorry, that's a bit of a digression.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan, but Lee Dixon said it in his commentary more than once. Cucurella, I'm not a big fan.
Cucurella.
You saw him for that winning goal, tearing down the line to get that ball, to put the final winning goal on the striker's bootlaces. Game over.
Yeah.
Walker should have gone earlier on in the tournament. It was loyalty that helped bring Southgate down. And that, for me, summed up the difference between a Euro winning team.
Well, I think this is and that's why I think that there's a bittersweet air to this, even for people who think possibly he could have done a better job. It was his loyalty that meant he didn't, and that's a nice quality to have. We like a bit of loyalty. Do you want to have a guess at who the current favourite is with the bookies?
Eddie Howe?
No, not bad. He's third. Guess I'll give you two more goes.
I'm not interested if it's not Eddie Howe.
It's a football phone in. I'll leave it hanging. I'll do a hook and tease. Who do you think is leading with the bookies? Phil's in Worcester. Phil, what would you like to say?
Well, first off, I think it's Graham Potter, isn't it?
Yeah, you looked it up. Did you look it up or did you just guess?
No. Just ball knowledge, which I think you've been lacking this morning, James. And I think this conversation...
That's more like it. Go on.
I think this conversation is everything that's wrong with English football. We have got...
Can you say why don't you say stick to politics, eh? I'll get Gary Lineker on to tell me to stick to politics. Go on.
Well, yes, as I'm saying, I think it's everything that's wrong with English football, and it's our losers' mentality, because we are talking about Southgate as if he hasn't failed for 4 tournaments in a row.
Yes.
And we're making excuses, and we're picking out his best qualities. Well, let's make him a role in the FA, or let's make him an MP, which I think he'd actually be much better at than being a football manager.
Yeah.
This is a man who's got Middlesbrough relegated. He has no CV. No Premier League team would employ him. And 4 tournaments in a row. His defensive style, his picking of favourites, as we've discussed, is the reason we have failed. It's not the players. The players are world class. The manager isn't. And I'm so happy we're finally going to change things.
I like this brutality. What about the obvious response that he has secured more semi-finals and finals in international tournaments than pretty much anybody else on the planet in the last 6 years?
Well, as Ayrton Senna once said, finishing second is just the first of the losers, and I completely agree. Doesn't matter how many finals he's got to, doesn't matter how many semi-finals he's got to. It's about what he's won, which is absolutely nothing.
I can't argue with any of that, but if you're seeing him in the pantheon of England managers, he's done better than anybody except Alf Ramsey.
Yeah, but if you think about the nation's connection to the team and the type of football we played, Bobby Robson got us to a semi-final, but people love that team. It played good football.
People love this team.
Together.
I
don't love this team. Well, I think your true football fans don't love this team.
Oh, leave it out. Well, that's not true for a start, but also the young men that are genuinely inspiring role models are now wearing an England shirt instead of some members of previous generations.
We tolerate this team, but I think talking about them being role models rather than their performances on the pitch is again the issue. Did you enjoy England nil?
They can be both. They can be both. No, I didn't enjoy that match. But crikey, there've been games throughout the decades that I haven't enjoyed. It hasn't all been Gareth Southgate's fault. But I think you're right. I think not just an English malaise, but a consequence of so many years. To paraphrase the song, so many years of hurt meant that just doing better than everybody before perhaps gave Southgate a more credit than he deserved. Because ultimately, if you're not winning, you're not winning. If you're not winning, you're losing. You can write that down, Phil.
Thank you. Yeah, look, it was good for 1 or 2 tournaments. I don't disagree with you, but his time has long since passed. We probably should have got rid of him after the last Euros. We probably should have got rid of him after the World Cup. And I'm very happy we're getting rid of him now. We need to move on to someone whose focus isn't to be friends with the press.
No, that's more like it. That's it. Now it's sounding like a proper football phone-in. Thank you. That's more. And in fact, here's a great text just to add to the sense of it being a proper football phone-in. Nick writes, frankly, Brian, at the end of the day, the idea that all football fans communicate in some kind of common cliched idiolect is, to be fair, unfair and well out of chuffing order. As for replacing Southgate, who, by the way, continued to select players who made mistakes, it's unforgivable. It's obvious. Restore traditional values. Bring back Big Sam. Early ball to the big fella up front. Bish bosh, job done. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:47 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we may return to a traditional football phone-in shortly, but we have, I don't want to say more important matters before us, but they are more important. Fraser Knight has been looking into a section of society that hasn't really been looked into before, addressing the question of what happens to children who are left alone or home alone when their parents are jailed. Fraser, why did you start looking into this and what have you found?
James, I was approached by a charity that works with children. It was set up to support children when their parents go into prison. But one of the big things that they found is that we don't know who those children are. In fact, we've never known how many of them there are either. And it's a huge scandal. And it really comes back to this cycle of criminality. Many of these children, when their parents go into prison, are more at risk of committing crimes themselves. And what we've found and what we've been told is that actually there are scores of children who are being left to stay home alone when their parents are in jail, and it's because the authorities just simply don't know that they exist. April Jeffers, for example, is one of those children. She was 15 when her mum was sent to jail, and she told me, she's a bit older now, but she told me she and her siblings were left to fend for themselves at a time when they were at their most vulnerable point.
That's when I sort of expected Children's Services to step in, sort of wider support, but none of that was really in place. So my older sibling was about 17, so he's a bit older than me. My younger sibling had a dad that lived locally, so he went to live with him, but no one came to check that. So essentially, 3 children living on their own.
Now, this is an issue that the governments have been aware of. In fact, the previous government asked for a figure to be put on this and, how many children have parents in prison. They did some of the research, and it's only this week that we're actually going to get that number for the first time. In fact, I think this is going to be, I understand, one of the first issues that we hear from the new Prisons Minister, James Timpson, on. But the real question here is, you put that number out there. How do you know who these children are? You have a number. How do you know where to put the support into? And many inmates, I'm told, haven't been asked if they have children. Courts and prisons, they're not passing the information on when they do know. And April told me it made for her going through school so much harder.
I think my life was quite difficult anyway at 15 because my mum was involved with drugs and alcohol. But as a 15-year-old losing your primary caregiver, I was just about to sit my GCSEs. My school attendance obviously dropped, so I wasn't attending school as much as I was.
Now, some research has suggested, James, that 65% of children who have a parent behind bars go on to offend themselves. It's something that Labour put in their manifesto. They said they want to sort that out. And as I say, this Thursday, we expect the first official estimate to be released. But Sarah Burrows, who founded this charity that approached me, Children Heard and Seen, she said, we need more than just those figures.
The figures that are being released are going to be an estimate. It's still not known who the actual children are. Children actually do need to have support, be identified and supported. And it is quite strange that we are in 2024 and we don't know who the children are.
It's not often I'm lost for words, Fraser, but this is an absolutely extraordinary story.
It is. It surprised me a lot as well, hugely.
And we wait for Thursday to discover the scale of the problem. Listen, I fully acknowledge you may not know the answer to these questions because the story is so fresh, as it were. The details are so fresh. But has it always been like this, or was the system better geared in the past to catching these children when they find themselves in these situations?
I understand it's always been like this. Sarah Burrows that was speaking there, she set up this charity to support children because she was worried about them not having the support. And she said even for herself, 10 years ago, she was like, how on earth do we not know how many there are, never mind where they are? There has been calls for specific legislation around this.
I saw that. It was Kerry Taylor, wasn't it? Kerry McCarthy, sorry. Yeah,
she spoke just before the general election. Of course, she's now serving in government. It's unclear as to whether there will be anything in the King's speech about this tomorrow. But of course, we wait to hear from the Prisons Minister about what happens next.
Well, he will know, won't he, Timpson, more about this than probably anybody who's been anywhere near the Home Office in 20 years, certainly from the political side of the equation. But that I'm just trying to think where responsibility lies. So if you're a judge and you send someone to jail and you know that they've got children, you'd sort of hope a judge might take some interest in what happens to the children as the mother is carted away to... Yep.
I think, this is one of those stories, and it happens so many times where actually it's all about just the system not being linked up properly. There might be one person in the system who's made aware of it, but does that information get to, children's services to make sure that they know where those children are? They make sure they get the support they do, because in some situations, of course they do, but they're just not getting it across the board.
And some children would almost be hiding from the authorities as well. So it's not
stigma.
As if they're not sticking their hand up in the air and asking for help. Fraser Knight, you'll be back on Thursday, I imagine, or certainly we'll be back in this sort of territory. But before you go, was there a team, an international team that did quite well against Spain in the earlier rounds of the Euros?
I believe Scotland did beat Spain. Yes.
I knew there was one. It's 11:53. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I like this from Kevin. James's football phone-in is brilliant. Will you be doing a motoring one tomorrow? And what are the odds on the Kidderminster manager to be the next England coach? That's from Kevin in Hertford, who describes himself as a Spurs supporter. 6 more minutes to get your once-in-a-generation chance to call into a football phone-in on LBC with me, James O'Brien. Andy's in the Cotswolds. Andy, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello,
very, very refreshing to swerve politics for a while.
What a polite word for you to
Very
use.
refreshing.
Yes, go on.
Just back from Berlin. Managed to, via Turkey. Got in at 3 o'clock this morning.
Oh, Lordy.
I've always been a big fan of Gareth Southgate as a man and what he's done for the cohesion. He's got the lads wanting to play for England, and not all England players have wanted to play for England.
That's very true, yeah.
He always said that, he would get to the Euros and then that would probably be it, and he's a man of his word. And I think he's taken us as far as we can go. But remember, 2 finals that England have been in, major finals, and we haven't had that in our lifetime, unless you're around.
And you know what, though? We may not again either. That's the other point, isn't it? Is that people getting cross with the idea that one little tweet. Here's Rich. He says you should record these calls saying it's good that he's gone, and then play them back in 10 years after 5 successive group stage round of 16 knockouts. You don't know what you've got. He says, quoting Joni Mitchell, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. There might be some truth in that.
Well, that was my 16th tournament that I followed England, right? Oh. And so I started in 1982.
Right.
So anyone who wants to lecture me about how great England have been down the years, I've done the hard yards, right?
So, were you there for the Iceland defeat?
Do you know what? I'd resigned. I'd had enough. I couldn't do Roy Hodgson. And remember, the FA have got appalling form in this area.
Yes, they really have.
They appointed Sam Allardyce. He lasted 1 game before there was all sorts of murmurings about corruption, and they had to get Gareth Southgate in, and nobody really wanted Southgate, and he surprised a lot of people. And I think a lot of it goes down to, the team took the knee, and a lot of football fans just didn't like that, and they blamed Southgate, and some of us thought, fair play, that's what we want.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and I think that we haven't talked about that much today, and because it hasn't come up, but I'm glad you raise it, because I found myself wondering what that does, the relationship between the player and the shirt, what was damaged in that relationship by the actions of so many racist fans. And there was so much horrible abuse of Rashford, Sanchez and Saka. It was absolutely off the charts. And I did find myself wondering what that might do. And whatever damage it might have done was enormously mitigated by the response of Gareth Southgate. But that was a particularly ugly chapter in English football history, and it was navigated, I think, close to perfectly by Gareth Southgate. Who do you reckon then, Andy?
Well, I don't reckon, because I'd love to have Jurgen Klopp for a 2-year project. Yeah, let him have a sabbatical, come to England, manage England, take us to the World Cup, see how we get on. That Jurgen Klopp would be fantastic. An honorary Scouser, and everybody in Liverpool loves him. Yeah. Well, maybe not Evertonians, but
Odds on that?
I'd say that reasonably long, but you never know.
No, you don't. If he fancies it, he's obviously got a deep affection for the country, or at least for the city of Liverpool, possibly for England in general. He is one of those managers that's managed to transcend a lot of the tribalism, and it would be lovely to see. And it's a nice challenge if you make it as Andy suggests. Let him have 6 months off. Make it a nice package. Like, just come in, do the World Cup, and then go off and do whatever you want. You've got this team, you've got this young team. Look at what you could do with it. I don't know. And I certainly don't know when we'll be doing a football phone-in again, but I'm enjoying it while it lasts. Thank you, Andy. Suzanne is in Warrington. Suzanne, what would you like to say?
I would just like to say that I think Southgate has done the right thing. He's done the honourable thing, and I think he's probably, for himself, is the stage where he is at as well, and whatever goes on politically with the FA, because they do seem to favour English, born and bred men.
Latterly, we haven't thought about the possibility of having a female manager, but I don't think those days are upon us quite yet.
That's probably a bit too far, but there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I'm Danish from background. We don't have those kind of barriers. We probably see men contra women just about being, a good manager, being a good leader. And I think just putting that on to the who's going to lead the England team, I would like to see someone slightly more aggressive, more progressive, someone that can really. Yeah, I think the raw material is there. There's a lot of really, really good young players. Plenty of them.
And someone could come in and just find a little sprinkle of magic dust that Gareth Southgate never quite managed to find.
I think he did extremely well, but he's obviously got a team of FA people behind him who's constantly, perhaps putting...
Maybe. They're better than they used to be, but they've not been ideal. You were a Jan Molby fan back in the day?
Well, yes, I played football myself as a very young player.
Did you?
I went. Yeah. I played
because you've picked up a bit. You've picked up a bit of an accent in the Northwest.
Yeah.
And yet the Danish accent is still there as well, and that's exactly what happened to Jan Molby, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be honest, I was, there's been plenty of really good star players on the Danish team that never really made it because they couldn't handle the money and the lifestyle and the admiration.
And Southgate has given these lads a foundation for their futures, I think, that you're right to refer to. I'm going to read this in its entirety if there's time. James, I'm a black woman in my 50s. I know very little about football. 4 years ago, I was compelled to drive from Leeds to Wembley to just be part of the atmosphere when the English team reached the final. It was fantastic. As I drove home that night, I knew those black players would be in for a lot of abuse, and sadly it came. This time I watched the England-Switzerland game in an inner-city Leeds bar, and I was honestly moved to see how packed it was, full of all races of people. Those 5 penalty takers all have Afro heritage. You have no idea how it makes you feel to see those boys take the team through. Social media was on fire the following day, referencing their race. The reason I write is because as a black person, English football is not scary anymore.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 12 is the time. I think, that we are on a permanent quest to find ways of reporting, reflecting and discussing the climate crisis without losing listeners. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. It just is not territory that lends itself to engaging conversations unless there is a hook like a Just Stop Oil protest or people up a bridge or stopping traffic, and then you can use it as a way into the broader issues. But the idea that it is the single most important issue facing humanity is, to me, irrefutable, and that bizarrely doesn't translate into something that we can and should talk about. Well, there's a difference between can and should, isn't there? Something that we can talk about on the programme every day. And remember, I'm commercial. It's not the BBC. They could, if they wanted to, do stuff on climate change every single day. But we can't, unless it's the most commercially engaging content that is available to us. I'm just reminding you of that in the hope that it might help you understand why we don't do it even more often on this programme than we currently do. And one thing I've learned when we have done it, and it came into focus, didn't it, with that film, that Leonardo DiCaprio film on Netflix a couple of Christmases ago, Don't Look Up. That really speaks to what I've just tried to articulate, the dichotomy in our species, a dichotomy among humans between the two extremes. One extreme is we're going to completely ignore it. We're even perhaps, and unfortunately, certainly on the other side of the Atlantic, these people are now on the march. We're not just going to completely ignore it, we're going to claim that it's not real, or we're going to deny the necessity of addressing it. And again, it's always the same with racists and xenophobes, isn't it? The bleed from anti-immigration rhetoric into anti-net zero rhetoric is almost complete. It's not a Venn diagram, it's a circle. And yet, of course, one of the biggest impacts of not seeking to address climate change is going to be the migrations of people on a scale that we've possibly never seen before. But hey-ho, there's never any logic once you let the racists in the room. And at the other extreme, you've got people who live in a state of existential dread. People who have, and I think on the generational scale, the younger you are, the more likely you are perhaps to recognise this, although that's a general observation. It's certainly not an exclusive one. There will be plenty of people who are older than me who feel what is being called by doctors eco-distress a lot more keenly than I do. Sometimes it's not like Don't Look Up when they used a meteor heading towards Earth as an allegory for climate change, and the response from the planet, from the people on the planet, was exactly the same in many ways as it is to climate change, albeit that the threat wasn't as immediately visible. The temptation not to look up is the same as not to look in, and the reason why you don't look in to this Pandora's box of potential horrors is because you haven't got the bandwidth never mind the inclination to process the full implications of what is potentially on the horizon. The Royal College, and then, of course, as if like night following day, as some institutions, staffed exclusively by experts, seek to address some of these issues, up pops the Daily Mail to throw its toys out the pram and whine about it. Now doctors told to lecturers on climate change. Yeah. I mean, for heaven's sake. Actually, there's another article today. I can't remember where it was, probably the Daily Mail. There's someone saying, I smoke because everyone tells me not to. I handed out cigarettes at my wedding because we're sick of being told. No, you smoke because you're chemically addicted to it, mate. You don't smoke because you're some sort of Citizen Smith activist who's sticking it to the man by massively increasing the chances of giving yourself and the people around you lung cancer and countless other diseases. It's sort of pathetic whining that comes from the people who cast themselves usually as the anti-snowflake. I'm anti-snowflake, but I never stop whining about everything. It's just bizarre, that projection, isn't it? So the therapists say, is that if I point one finger at you, there are three fingers pointing back at me, and a thumb sort of up. It's 8 minutes after 12, because this is obviously real, isn't it? There are many reasons why you would want doctors to be looking out for eco-distress and using their opportunities as trusted members of the community to point it out. I mean, not least skin cancer. The necessity of having cream on when you're out in the sun is not a conclusion of climate change. You could catch skin cancer from being out in the sun too much before we even had the phrase climate change in our shared vocabulary. But goodness me, the necessity of being aware of it, the idea that that's controversial, even by the standards of the Daily Mail, is frankly hilarious, isn't it? But that's not really what I want to talk about, the wisdom of the Royal College of Physicians urging its members to do a little bit more to raise awareness. What I want to talk about is the reality of eco-distress. And I want you simply to tell me when it kicked in, when and why it kicked in. But you recognise what is meant by eco-distress. It's a level of anxiety and depression caused not by climate change per se, but equally by the prospect of what will happen if we don't get our finger out. So it's climate change and lethargy, I suspect, that feeds into eco-distress more than anything else. It's not exclusively climate change, and it's not exclusively lethargy. It's what happens when you marry the two together. And obviously the second thing I want to know is what it's like. What does it feel like? I get it with people who've done the Just Stop Oil training. That I think really brings home the sense of urgency that would almost inevitably lead to eco-distress. That's quite interesting as well. The more you get it, the more likely you are to get eco-distress. And there's something quite human about self-protection. This is another reason why that film was so good. I know that if I immersed myself further into climate change science, I would be more anxious and depressed than I am already. I'm not happily particularly anxious or depressed at this stage in my life, but like all human beings, I have a capacity for it. And I know, so for example, at the moment, I'm anxious and depressed about Donald Trump's likely victory in November because his fascistic tendencies are undeniable now. Even the man he's elected as his running mate has described him or compared him to Hitler in the past. So the idea that it's just sort of lefty snowflakes that worry about Trump's tendencies towards the authoritarian is absurd. His own running mate compared him to Hitler not long ago in a message to a friend that has been made public, I think, since the announcement was made. And that makes me anxious and depressed, but I can't not know about it. I can't not follow Donald Trump's march to the White House. And if I somehow, so I'll be on holiday next week, and I will make a conscious effort not to get too plugged into American politics particularly, but politics in general. And when I come back, you'll notice there'll be a lightness in my tone for a few weeks that is not there now because I'm coming to the end of a long shift. So the knowledge that immersing myself still further into climate change science would make me more anxious and depressed becomes, I think, subconsciously, but now consciously, because I'm saying it out loud, it becomes subconsciously and consciously a reason not to do it. And that is a knot I can't undo. That is a knot I can't unravel. That is the central premise, the psychological genius at the heart of the Don't Look Up film. If you haven't seen it, I won't tell you how it ends, but do see it, because it really focuses your mind on the philosophical problems that are attendant upon the climate crisis. Why on earth would I do something that will make me anxious and depressed? Look, I know the obvious answer is because there are more important things than your mental health, James, or there are more important things than your anxiety and depression. What about the future of the species, man? I know you're right, but I can't affect the future of the species anywhere near as profoundly as I can affect my own mental health. Why would I choose to do something that's going to make me more anxious and depressed? That's not the angle I was expecting to adopt on this story, but I felt a need for a kind of mea culpa when I know that I'll be speaking to people who feel this crisis more keenly than I do. I want to know why you feel it more keenly than others. Maybe don't use me as the example. What made the penny drop for you? When and why did the penny drop? Did the eco-distress kick in? Anxiety and depression caused by climate change. And my cautious suggestion that the more you understand it, then the more likely you are to suffer from anxiety and depression about it. I don't know how you break that conundrum. Maybe the fact that you're doing something about it mitigates your anxiety. Does it? Does it? I don't know. So what spawned it? When did it kick in to move from a general unease about climate change, a general understanding of it being a bad thing, to an actual identifiable condition, if you like, that is called eco-distress and used to describe the specific anxiety and depression caused by contemplating and understanding climate change? So what did it for you? And what is it exactly, in your words? What does it feel like? It's coming up to 12:15. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And the number you need to contribute to this conversation, which is the most important conversation we will ever have, and yet is somehow not important enough for us to talk about endlessly every day, 03456060973 is the number that you need. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 12. I actually, unintentionally, Ollie, you've crystallised what I was trying to say in the last 10 minutes. Given the size of your audience, James, if you were more switched on about climate change, the better informed and more likely to take action your audience would be. Yeah, but the more I explain about climate change to my audience, the more likely they are to contract eco-distress and become anxious and depressed. And what are you going to do if your radio is making you anxious and depressed? Click. You're going to turn over to Smooth, aren't you? Or Radio X. Go and check out what Toby's up to on Radio X. So that's what I meant by the commercial imperative. But sometimes the conversation is fascinating, and today is one of those days. What is eco-distress, and when did you get it? Paul's in Shaftesbury. Paul, what would you like to say?
Oh, thank you for that, James.
You're welcome.
And thank you for spending some time with me. Just a short resume. Mid-1990s, I was getting, on one ear, the oil companies telling me there's nothing wrong, and Friends of the Earth, of whom I was a member, saying we're doomed.
Yes.
So I decided to take an Open University degree course in environmental studies. It took me 7 years, the same time as working like a dog. But what it taught me was enough to frighten the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
And in particular, things like the deal between the oil companies and the motor industry, and the ignorance of governments burying things and going along doing handshakes, all of which did my health no good.
Okay.
And so I end up now at the age of 73, without having regular shakes, waking up at 2 o'clock every morning, dreading Trump and what that will mean to the planet. And
so I think you're outdoors, and the wind is making it a little bit difficult to follow everything you're saying. But it is the more you're telling us, I think, the more you understand the science and you took a degree in it specifically, the more likely you are to be anxious and depressed about everything.
It's watching the predictions, which I worked out as part of the degree course, actually all fall into place at the same pace as was predicted. So where we are now, bad weather, isn't it?
Yeah.
While Madrid is at 41 degrees all summer, it just falls into place. And the next part on the hockey stick just scares the bejesus out of me. And it's the reason why there's lots of 70-something-year-olds who take part in Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, because the guilt is more than you can handle.
Guilt. Why guilt?
Well, most of my working life, I drove 50,000 miles a year.
Right.
Now, most of the time, I was driving, as soon as I realised, I switched to a Prius, if you'll pardon me. And since 2020, I've switched to an electric car.
Right.
But, you watch and listen to the absolute Jesus rubbish how bad.
I know, and I'm getting a few through already. I mean, someone recommends an author to me who I haven't heard of before. I Google their name, and lo and behold, they've worked for the Cato Institute and the Ayn Rand Institute, so secretly funded think tanks that are almost certainly, or quite possibly, receiving, because they're secretly funded, we won't know, money from fossil fuel companies, and then they write books saying we should use more fossil fuels. I mean, how can people recommend stuff like that to someone like me without having done the most cursory research themselves?
You look where the money for Tufton Street doesn't come from.
Well, that's exactly the point, isn't it? And that's where and it is simply we need to keep this tap on, because the money that's pouring out of it makes its way into our pockets. So you've had this for decades. You had eco-distress before it was fashionable.
Oh yeah, I'm an old dinosaur, but it was we knew in 1990, and obviously Exxon Petroleum had all the information in the 1970s, and that just makes it worse. And then you look and BP and Shell. Do you know BP and Shell? They do EV charging, but it's the most expensive EV charging of all the competition. Tesla is half the price.
Yeah, I've got no reason to doubt that. But no, that's okay. So it just means I haven't got the details in front of me. But as you've mentioned a few times, you do look like you're across it all. And
unfortunately,
there's no silver lining here, is there?
No.
So here's the thing, Paul.
There is one country.
Go on.
Yeah. There is one country that's a silver lining, and that country is China.
Okay.
China are building sustainable energy at a huge rate. 50% of their cars that they're selling are electric in China. They are massively investing in sustainable energy.
And of course, the usual suspects usually bang on about what's the point of us doing anything if China's doing all. The thing people don't understand about China, that you probably do understand, is that the Chinese political establishment, post-Mao Zedong, or possibly pre-Mao Zedong actually, but is looking hundreds of years ahead. It's planning. I don't want to use a phrase like world domination because it sounds a little bit sci-fi. But if you look at their investments in, for example, Africa, China is thinking centuries in terms of where the country will be. Western democracies are generally thinking in electoral cycles. So they're thinking in 4 or 5 year cycles. So I'm unsurprised, although I didn't know in advance as what you've just told me about China, I'm completely unsurprised by it, because if they understand the science and they want to be the most powerful country on earth in 200, 300 years' time, they would be doing exactly what you've just described, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Whereas Putin is thinking only about Putin. So he's not going to do anything. In fact, he's going to go in exactly the opposite direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And funnily enough, there's a brilliant little podcast called Just Have a Think.
Oh, I like it.
Called Dave Ball. And he's brilliant, and he analyses these situations. And he did one only a few weeks ago about China, and it's an eye-opener. I
mean, it's a good recommendation. I'm always slightly wary when these recommendations go out what's the word I want? Unvetted. Yeah, no, it wasn't quite the word I wanted, but that'll do. Thank you. Unvetted. But you seem like a stand-up guy, Paul. I'm not going to ask you the question on the tip of my tongue, but I'll tell you what it is. I won't let Paul answer it because I don't want to upset him. Why would I want to be like that? Why would I want to be waking up I mean, I probably should be, and maybe as I get older I will be. But that's the problem here. That is the problem here. Very simply put. why would you want to avail yourself of the information more if it's going to make you so unhappy? That's a human condition. It's the problem at the heart of all of these discussions. But you've still got to have them. And we will. Thank you, Paul. I think I said Just Stop Oil earlier when I talked about the training. I meant Extinction Rebellion, didn't I? They're the ones that do the courses, and we've had callers over the years. In fact, I've got a very close friend who's been on the course and been arrested, in fact, on one of those protests, and that eco-distress being a big driving force. If you didn't have it before you went on that course, I think you'd have it afterwards. Todd's in Rickmansworth. Todd, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for raising awareness of this really important topic. I'm a former airline pilot, and I have had eco-anxiety or eco-distress or eco-empathy, eco-awareness, whatever you want to call it, recognised by a psychiatrist at the Civil Aviation Authority.
Wow.
Because it now affects my ability to carry out my job safely and operate an aircraft, essentially. And, you know, I was wanting to be a pilot since I was 5 years old, grew up on a council estate. It was an absolute dream for me. And I studied meteorology in my pilot training, was never once told that Earth's systems were breaking down rapidly. And it wasn't until I had my medical revoked about 5 or 6 years ago and went off to Peru. I was at a place called Rainbow Mountain, which is 100 meters lower than Everest Base Camp. And the snow had completely melted on top. And the guide was telling me that Peru was one of the first countries to be hit by the climate crisis. And I was like, what? You know, this was in 2018. And that planted a seed, James. I stayed in denial for a couple more years. I wanted to get my medical back, get back to the job and pay off my mum and dad.
Yeah.
But yeah, one thing led to another. I got bitten by a tick in Richmond Park, diagnosed with Lyme disease. Thankfully got over that, but that's much more common due to milder winters and warmer summers. And then, of course, the pandemic happened and enough was enough. So I joined Extinction Rebellion and was put through spokesperson training. And yeah, that's I kind of came in. Yeah, I can't. Well, it's a heading for extinction talk you're referring to, the course, and it's terrifying. Yeah, but I'd already kind of looked at the climate science before that. I could see the direction of travel, and as pilots, we're trained to think free from bias, to mitigate risk, to preserve life. So, if I couldn't take action, and you know, with the pandemic, it felt like we realised
you can't do both. You can't mitigate risk and fly jumbo jets. Or can you?
Well, you can mitigate if we have a mid-air, you know, if we use the analogy of flying, we all want to get to our destination, right? Yeah. We all want to take off and get there. But if at any point in the midst of the flight we encounter severe weather or something impacting the safety of the aircraft, without hesitation, we've worked together effectively with our crew and changed course. And if the government and airline industry changed course in proportion to the level that's required in line with the Paris Agreement, for instance, then the anxiety wouldn't be there.
Right.
It's only there because of a lack of action. And, ultimately it can't be pathologized to say that there's a problem with the individual or me. It's a perfectly healthy and rational response to an existential threat. And
yes, but I mean, so I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. That's why I talked about the prospect of Donald Trump getting into the White House. That makes me anxious and depressed. But it's also, it should be the logical response of anybody who understands anything. But it is still a mental health issue.
Yeah,
anxiety and depression, whether they're logical or not, if you see what I mean, are mental health issues, aren't they? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. But it's not really.
And most people would choose not to be anxious and depressed if they have any agency whatsoever. Which is why I think the ambivalence exists, not the denial. That comes from a different place entirely. But and maybe the ambivalence is fed by the denial. This notion that it's two sides to it. It's like the old Pascal Lamy versus Andrea Leadsom debate that I had to host on Newsnight. The idea that there are equal and opposite forces in play here, because the Daily Telegraph's still running full-page editorials about there being no such thing as global warming. I don't know if it is. That's a figure of speech. But for the person in the middle to choose not to be anxious or depressed, that's the big challenge, actually, is to get them on board in a way that they're going to want to be. And I don't know that anyone can do that, Todd. And go on.
Yeah. I mean, from my experience, one of the things that's just quite clear to me is that, you know, when there's a saber-toothed tiger in the jungle and we can see it in the moment and we can respond to it, and our nervous systems are quite good with that. But, you know, with the saber-toothed tiger, off on the mountain with us in sight and this distant threat, which isn't right here now, people can't really respond to that in a way without engaging with the science, which does lead to that nervous system response.
It's a vicious cycle. Why do you think you responded to it so much more than others in your line of work or in your peer group or in your generation?
I'm not quite sure.
No.
I mean, I know that I'm a big picture thinker, and for me, when I studied meteorology, to see the interconnected nature of weather systems and the trajectory was on, it just felt very clear. I do find today, having gone through 2 years of absolute despair and panic, I have found a place where I can manage the anxiety. I'm a quote unquote activist for about a third of my life. It's not a 7-day a week, 24-hour day thing like it was. I've found a way to live with it, and I think that's really important. And yeah, that's taken time. I've been with a therapist who's an expert on this for the last 4.5 years, and she's co-authored papers that studied 10,000 young people in the Lancet around the world.
Wow!
And this is a real issue, you know.
Well, you're talking about balance, aren't you?
Yeah.
In terms of your mental equilibrium and being comfortable that you're doing your bit without it being allowed to take over your entire life. Yeah. That's so helpful to me, Todd. Thank you. That really is. You've opened up dimensions, both callers actually so far, both drawing on quite high-level academic study to explain their distress, if you like. And that is almost the definition of evidence-based, isn't it? Thank you. 12:30 is the time. Jenny Barsby has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're looking at eco-distress. And I hope this is helpful. Trying to understand some of the anomalies, some of the apparent anomalies in climate change coverage. And one of them has come into really sharp focus today. It's not pretty, but I think it's helpful. And knowing more would make you more miserable, anxious, depressed, whatever description you prefer, makes you less likely to find out more. I don't know how you get over that. That is the challenge that Ed Miliband and other politicians face, and of course the campaigners and the activists. How do you get over that? Because I believe eco-distress is real. If I didn't before I spoke to Peter and Todd, or Paul and Todd, forgive me, I've forgotten the name of the first caller, but if I didn't before I spoke to them, I would now. But I haven't moved away from that point of saying that why would I want to embrace that level of angst? Todd did a good job of explaining how you can actually manage it and end up, if you like, being engaged and informed enough to really, really care, but not enough to feel bleak. That's good therapy. But that's not open to everybody. Les is in Liverpool. Les, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, thank you so much for the topic, and I love the angle you're taking on it. It's a brilliant way of talking about this anxiety, and I think the most disappointing part of it, I think, is the part that we are able to actually deal with this issue as a society, and often we just choose not to.
Yes. You use we very loosely. We're talking about governments, of course, really.
Yes, governments, corporations. But, there were no technological solutions in the past or not easily achievable, but we are getting closer, and, that's a positive factor. We have so many more tools in our armory to deal with this problem, but we're running out of time.
I think you remind me of one of the elements of ambivalence that is a bit more charitable, which is a sort of subconscious optimism. Oh, don't worry, the clever people will sort it out.
I don't even go this way, because I think a lot of us do better. Since 2010, I actually been very involved in this, and I swapped to electric cars when they were really rubbish, like back in 2010. I have solar panels installed eight years ago in one place. Then I have a bigger installation with batteries. My business runs on renewable energy, and their fleet is now also powered by renewables. So there's many people. There's a big... a big group of people who are really nice people actually to talk to, because they're quite empathetic. You find that people who are in this group, they generally care about how other people live, and it's positive, and it gives you this compartmentalized positivity that you need in this situation. Because if you do look at the big picture all the time, and you realize
I hear
so
you.
much more to do.
I mean, Dale Vince can be quite an inspiring and an evangelical character in this field, and I know he's not alone. Do you feel eco-distress? Do you recognise, because you sound quite cheerful, which is nice, but do you recognise what's being described in this story?
I just understand my limitations, and I do what I can do.
Okay.
Like I try to evangelize on my own little field and try not to be too preachy.
Yes.
I think I failed multiple times on this.
You and me
not being
both,
too.
although not on this subject. I'm preachy on every other subject. You've got this one covered.
Yeah, that's cool. You got me right away. But it's just what you can do, and then your choices that you make. You can get depressed, but it's kind of like as you said, it's not a Venn diagram. You get depressed by the same things and same people. So the people who are responsible for climate change and the people who are responsible for misinformation about climate change are also the same people who are supporting the politicians and the corporations that drive it.
Yes.
And I'm ex-Catholic atheist person for last 20 years.
Okay.
And I kind of find heading more towards Buddhist, philosophy on this.
Okay, yeah, well, because you need to, and that way you can hold all of the conflicting thoughts in your mind at the same time, and that well, that's nice, isn't it? That's two calls on the trot that have managed to sound quite upbeat about a condition born of angst, born of depression or anxiety. This text takes us back in the opposite direction, sadly. It's not just the angst about the end of the world, James. It's also about the grief of knowing what we're doing to the earth and all the creatures that share it with us. I did a master's in ecology over 20 years ago, since when I've had to entirely avoid nature documentaries. I do get that, but I don't want to be like that. That's the point I'm trying to convey. I think successfully. I hope successfully. Les, thank you. It is 12:38. Ben's in Eastleigh. Ben, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Thanks for covering this topic. Hugely important one. So, I am, or I was, I guess, what you would call a climate distress sufferer. So I first sort of came across climate science, I guess, 15 years ago, teacher by trade, head of year, doing assemblies on global warming, but there was that sort of slight ambivalence, that kind of, surely someone won't let it happen, surely.
Yeah. I think that's very widespread, usually subconsciously, probably.
Yeah, exactly. For me, the tipping point came when I had my own children.
Okay.
And at that point, having been well read on the subject, there was just a change. The world became a different shade, and you start sort of approaching the subject with your friends, with very educated people.
Yes.
And there's sort of three categories of people. The people that look at you like a loony, the people that don't want to talk about it, or the people in complete denial. And you kind of think, hang on a minute, how can you be going 6 flights a year? How can you be driving that car? And irrationality started kicking in then. And you're kind of walking down the street feeling angry, feeling emotional, looking at people in cars and kind of quasi-blaming them for the whole situation.
Wow.
And it became kind of all-consuming. I think it became all-consuming. Your previous caller mentioned grief, so you've got that grief and that guilt. But it's just a total lack of control that here I am, having had a wonderful life, and my own children aren't going to get that wonderful life. And it was just so difficult to actually to comprehend and to get my head around. And it was like no one was listening. It was kind of like
you're making it sound like an anxiety dream, actually. It's like when you try and scream and no sound comes out.
It was like that. It was like being frozen in amber, you know, and the rest of the world is moving around you, and people dismissing it as though it's nothing. It's just a change in the weather. And so for me, that sort of built up, and I tried to get some counselling. It was the wrong sort of counselling on reflection, and then I moved towards sort of, you know, birds of a feather stick together. I joined XR,
right?
Involved in the first London protests, joined the Green Party. But unfortunately, that wasn't enough. And I ended up, funny enough, at my sister's wedding, whether it was because it's the day of happiness, maybe the dichotomy tipped me over the edge. Yeah. But I ended up having a breakdown over it all.
Gosh. And you think that was the big factor? That was the big factor.
Yes, undeniably. And I walked out of that wedding looking for a place to take my own life. I ended up being hospitalised. Now, I'm delighted to say I've had some really brilliant therapy since, and very strong now, and probably much stronger for having broken.
Yes.
And one thing I've learned is that you're never in control of anything.
No, that's very true.
Frankly.
That's quite Zen, actually. That's why Les was talking about Buddhism. I think you've just sort of happened onto similar territory from a very different angle, haven't you? That's exactly what it is.
Exactly. That past is gone, the future hasn't happened yet, and just sort of live in the now. And whereas before I used to look at people and get angry at the way they were living and the way they were sort of dismissing the iceberg that's dead ahead. I now just try and go, okay, well, I can't control what they're doing. I can just live my values, live my principles. And if people want to talk to me about it, great. I recently stood for MP for the Green Party, and that was a really kind of cathartic experience as well.
And you have to work through the anxiety to be an effective advocate, don't you? Because otherwise you're going to spiral, as you described. You need for advocacy involves engagement and almost a kind of relish for exchanges, a relish for discussion, discourse. Otherwise, you're going to be a rubbish advocate, a rubbish activist.
Yeah, that exactly. And I think, the biggest lesson I learned is if you sit and wallow, you'll spiral. It's about, if you're suffering with climate distress, climate anxiety, there's some brilliant help out there. Go and find it.
That's so interesting. So I've started this conversation from a point of, this is an interesting thing. Let's talk about it. People like you've been on the journey already and found the place of repose that I started off doubting existed. But to you and to quite a few people getting in touch actually, and to Les, the balance is achievable.
It is. I mean, my breakdown was 7 years ago now, 7 years ago. And even though the world you'd argue now is in actually a worse position than it was 7 years ago, I feel much stronger being able to deal with that because inevitably we all end up, at the end of our life's journey somewhere dead.
Of course we do. And that's precisely why the Royal College of Physicians is absolutely right to tell doctors to be not to be looking out for this because it's almost Hippocratic Oath territory. It's something they can help with, like you were helped.
It is. And I think going forward, my biggest worry, because I'm a teacher, is actually I think we're going to see waves of this amongst younger people.
The anxiety it's often held up as perhaps one of the contributing factors to mental health issues. When we stop talking about social media for a second or two, the climate crisis pops up pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, you've done a good job today. You've reached people today. You've touched people today, and that is a mark of the work that you've done and the progress that you've made, the journey that you've been on. Thank you, Ben. It's incredibly helpful and illuminating story that you tell, and it changes the entire topic in a way. Yes, of course, the Daily Mail is still either pretending not to understand it or encouraging other people not to understand it. But the idea that by having medical help, by having healthcare, you can get to a much, much better place. From a place of pain and distress, which they choose to call eco-distress, you can get to the place described by Ben and by Les and by other callers. Graham puts it well. He goes, listening to this guy is amazing. I didn't think this was an issue, and then I realised I actually get the same. But with litter, I can't control it, so I think I need to look at not trying to control it. You accept that's such a crucial part of therapy and some religions. Accepting that you can't control things, and immediately you'll feel your anxiety levels start diminishing. It's why OCD is such an exhausting condition. 12:45 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:47 is the time. I have explained to you a few times that the reality and impact of long COVID are things that I'm going to be looking at a little more, not least because when you read that the number of people who took up the offer of a free spring COVID booster fell sharply this year, you realise that the understanding of long COVID is still incredibly inadequate because, of course, if you understood the reality of long COVID, you would, as a government or as a health service, be a lot more on the ball about trying to make sure people don't get COVID short COVID, for want of a better phrase. There's two stories in the news today. The first is that low take-up of COVID jabs posing a risk to the vulnerable. I'd add to that also, of course, increasing the likelihood of people who contract COVID because they haven't had their booster ending up with long COVID. And the other story involves more than 120 teachers who have long COVID suing the Department for Education over its handling of the pandemic. And Emily Mason is a former teacher and the founder of Long COVID Educators for Justice, who've instigated this case. I suppose, Emily, the first question I should ask is what are you going to argue in court that the Department for Education should have done differently, given that it was largely uncharted waters for most institutions and organisations?
Sure. Hi. Thanks
Hello.
for speaking with me.
You're very welcome.
I think there's lots of aspects to this. I think we feel very strongly that there were lots of failings that happened throughout the pandemic where the government just didn't learn and just kept making multiple mistakes. I think to say that it was uncharted waters, we could see what was happening across Europe. Italy was a few weeks ahead of us, but schools still didn't close. We could see what was coming. Schools didn't close in time in March. We didn't have enough guidance out there in schools. And then again, from that, we had schools returning back to class for one day. And then after huge union pressure, they closed again. Do you remember that in January?
I'd managed not to think about Gavin Williamson for a few weeks, but there he is, popping up again. Yeah. Yes, I do remember that. Of course I do.
So just that Christmas just passed, they lifted all restrictions so everybody could see friends and family over Christmas. They then sent us all back to school for one day. And then, as I said, following that union pressure, they then decided to close again. So they just didn't learn. And the whole Eat Out to Help Out, that spiked infection rates just before all the children returned to school after that summer of 2020. So just total disregard for children and teachers' safety.
All of which comes into a much starker light the more you understand about the reality of long COVID, which is where this comes from. Because if long COVID didn't exist, then a lot of this irresponsibility and a lot of this mishandling would not be as controversial or as consequential, because the stakes would have been much lower. So can you talk, for people who need help here, a little through what the condition? I know it can be different for almost every sufferer, but perhaps we could talk a bit about how it's affected you.
Sure. It's just been absolutely debilitating exhaustion. I get awful migraines, pain just across my whole body, awful brain fog, low cognitive functioning most days. After this, I'm going to have to probably go back to bed for the rest of the day. Yeah. So it's absolutely ruined my life and that of my families as well. And this is the case for hundreds of teachers up and down the country. And we are just forgotten. And
what is the response of the healthcare professionals? What kind of care are you getting? Because this is a fairly inadequate. So I know it's not central to the case that you're bringing, but it's helpful for my listeners to know what your experiences are.
It can be really varied up and down the country, and I think because people present with such different symptoms, you fall between consultants sometimes, and there's some counties have long COVID clinics and some don't. So the support in terms of health is not good enough. The support for teachers trying to go for ill health retirement because they're no longer able to work, and the financial support available is also not good enough.
I hesitate to ask this question, Emily, so forgive me in advance, but what is, do you feel, the likelihood of a full recovery for you or for long COVID sufferers in general?
The end of my sort of career, as it were, was a doctor telling me that I most likely won't recover from this. And hearing that from a fairly young and ambitious teacher was devastating. And that represents hundreds of teachers. And depending on where you are in your teaching career, can have massive consequences to pension as well. And teachers aren't being given ill health retirement easily. They're having to fight for it, and it's often being declined because people don't know enough about long COVID, and people are still saying that you can recover from it, when actually the picture is hundreds of teachers aren't recovering from it.
So I mean, it's not currently classified as an industrial disease or a disability, and yet all of the ramifications you've described would fit into one or both of those categories, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the unions are trying to push for that,
yes.
But schools don't have to adhere to it, and certainly Teacher Pension Service aren't acknowledging it. So we've been really just hung out to dry, and as I say, careers over, lives devastated by this. And the thing is, they like I say, they knew that there were problems in school and they failed to do anything about it. They knew there should be ventilation in classrooms. They sent out something like 7,000 ventilators across the country. It wasn't enough to keep the air clean in schools. And as a result, it's not just teachers. Children have been massively affected by long COVID too. And again, they're the forgotten voice. There's almost 55,000 children in the UK with long COVID.
And you're right. They're completely ignored as well. Finally, and thank you for your time this morning. The news when you read about spikes or new variants and simultaneous drops in the number of people getting. I mean, I presume you see another vanguard of long COVID sufferers who've got no idea what might be around the corner for them.
Absolutely, because it just doesn't seem like we've learned.
No.
We're still in classrooms, they're still overcrowded, there isn't the ventilation, we're not talking about clean air, we're not talking about masks. You know, we were told during the pandemic...
And you're mocked if you do. I mean, some people are mocked if they do. That pendulum seems to have swung very violently in the wrong direction. Everyone's pretending... Forgotten. Yes, exactly that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we were told not to wear masks, and if we did, we'd face disciplinary action. So now... trying to wear a mask in school, absolutely, you'd be ridiculed for it.
And yet you would be doing what you can do to avoid the path that you've found yourself on.
Absolutely, but there just isn't enough publication out there about long COVID.
No,
it's convenient we're going to try for us not to be heard.
Yes, well, we're going to try and, in our own small way, try and chip away at that edifice, but we can only do so with the help of people like you. So Emily Mason, the founder of Long COVID Educators for Justice. Many thanks indeed. And it is Emily's organisation that is taking or leading the joint legal action being brought by more than 120 teachers with long COVID, suing the Department of Education over its handling of the pandemic within schools. It's an important and a fascinating story. Emily, do take care. It's 12:55. Gavin Williamson, crikey. If I were a lawyer and I was seeking to prove incompetence, I'd probably be rubbing my hands with glee if Gavin Williamson was anywhere near the story, but I'm not a lawyer and I don't really know what I'm talking about. If you haven't noticed that already, you've probably noticed it by now. Last word, I suspect, on eco-distress to Kirsty, who's in Leicester. Kirsty, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I was a Green Party district councillor for 4 years. And I did suffer from eco-distress because I felt people weren't being listened to about it, they were being ridiculed. But I had at the same time...
the last topic, a bit like long COVID, actually. There were psychologically similar elements in that, weren't there?
Yeah, basically, you were, treated like an idiot.
Yes. Or paranoid or weird. And I think that's probably what Emily and some of her colleagues have experienced as well. But back to your journey. How did you move out of that space?
Well, unfortunately, about the same time, I had a child that was... severely ill, dangerously ill. So I was very depressed. Only kind of coming out of it now, things have kind of got better. I realised how depressed I was. So I suppose I put everything else to the side, although I was still Green Party district councillor and managed to do that during that time because I felt it was so important. I was the only one on my council. Fortunately now, 2 people have taken over. There's 2 Greens on the council, and I'm hoping now with the new government things will get a bit better, but I still think now what I'm doing is I've stepped back from it and I'm trying to come at it from a positive point of view, and that we have got solutions. And I'm an artist, so I try and paint the beautiful things in the world.
Good. That's therapeutic, right? Water. That's therapeutic. That's good for you. It's interesting, isn't it, how all of the calls, or not quite all, but most of the calls have moved through the eco-distress to a place of resolve, if you like, or a safer place, a happier place, a place of balance. So it's why Les's mention of Buddhism was so key. And moving through the anxiety is an absolutely crucial part of being an effective advocate or an effective activist. Kirsty, thank you. We will return to this subject, but as I say, when the moment is right, just as we will talk a lot more about long COVID, because it is clearly something that is affecting thousands of people, 55,000 children, for example, who have had their existences, never mind their education, turned absolutely upside down, while many loud political and media voices are convinced that they're all making it up or that they've got nothing to worry about at all. I did have something funny that was it, yes. This came in at the top of the last hour. And it's a shame it's unsigned because it deserved a little bit more love than it managed to achieve. But someone tuned in at 11 o'clock today and wrote, talking soccer on the it might be an American that's been in touch here, talking soccer on the James O'Brien show. That's like a brain surgeon talking about bingo. It just doesn't sound right. That's very flattering of you. But my favourite was one that I've managed to lose, which simply said, this is footballification gone mad. Having a conversation about football on this show. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. Gosh, download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Ben Kentish standing in for Tom Swarbrick, who's currently standing in for Nick Ferrari, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.